for jobs is likely to be kind of partially offset by hikes in the corporate tax rate, which is very popular among Democratic voters and within the Democratic Party, and then potentially on kind of the high income. So you do get to that space where it becomes kind of the redistributive. I think, to be honest, though, at the moment, we see the kind of support that's being provided to economies as absolutely crucial, because it's limiting that long-term damage to the economies, which we worried about so much and which we saw the damage from in the financial crisis. So to us, we really see fiscal support as being central to this part of the kind of the crisis and starting to build a recovery. And those questions about what kinds of taxes you raise have to be questions for a later day. And that really will depend on the government in question, in the particular country in question, and the historical relationship they have with things like wealth taxes, carbon taxes, those kinds of things.
All right, Stephanie, thanks so much for joining us today. A lot to talk about with you in a short amount of time. Hope we can get you back on the program as soon as possible. Stephanie Kelly there from Aberdeen Standard Investments, where she is a senior political economist. Tune in for our special coverage of President-elect Biden's inauguration, by the way. It is, of course, on Wednesday. It starts at 5 p.m. in Berlin, here in Berlin, which is 4 p.m. in London, 11 a.m. in Washington, D.C., and, of course, New York is in the same time zone as the U.S. Capitol. Coming up, the latest on the vaccine rollout, we speak to Dr. Scott Rismiller about how the private sector is helping with vaccine distribution in North Carolina. This is Bloomberg.
This is Bloomberg Best, your weekly review of the most important business news, analysis, and interviews from Bloomberg Television around the world.
Ken Burns, welcome to Bloomberg Big Decisions.
We have always been a mixture of things. We are always stronger for that mixture.
Growth is a way to stay competitive, delight more and more consumers.
Are you worried that people won't take the vaccine?
We remain concerned about vaccine hesitancy.
What is one word of advice you'll take with you?
Learn how to listen. And that is certainly something that has served me well.
Ankiti, where do you go from here?
It's a huge market. It's a huge opportunity. I want to go 100x from here.
Our philosophy is to partner where we can and stand apart when we should.
Our generation's biggest problem.
Climate change is happening.
And the world's most innovative solutions.
Transport, industry, buildings, electricity, all of those things.
Everything you need to know about our changing environment, the politics of global warming.
We can and we will deal with climate change.
In the fight against climate change, Bloomberg Green has you covered.
Their CPG history, their experience, and really how we might be able to combine together to really create this fantastic public company. And so we kind of got into the SPAC thing a little bit before it became such a hot method of going public.
From Berlin, this is Bloomberg Markets. I'm Matt Miller. Let's take a look at the markets on this Martin Luther King Jr. holiday. Of course, U.S. equity and bond trading are closed today, but you can see there S&P futures slightly in the red, really little changed. And there's not a lot of action in European equities either. Although we are trading, we're not really moving very much. The Stoxx Europe 600 index indicates that. The dollar is really where the action is. A lot of talk about which way it's going to go. Right now, the dollar spot index trading at 90.91. And then, of course, Bitcoin is always interesting to follow, especially amongst the volatility of the last couple of weeks or months, or I guess years, you could say. Bitcoin right now trading at $37,108 a piece. Global gaps in access to COVID-19 vaccines are raising concerns, with variants, strains of the disease multiplying. But in North Carolina, businesses are getting together to help distribute the vaccine. Joining me now is Atrium Health Chief Physician Executive Scott Rismiller. Doctor, it's great to have you. And it's interesting, we get a lot of stories today about how we really need to do this quickly and we need to do it in a uniform way. Otherwise, these mutations could threaten those who are already vaccinated. How are you going about it at Atrium?
Well, thank you for having me this morning. So at Atrium Health, we are really fortunate to have tremendous partners in our business community, such as Honeywell, Tepper Sports and Entertainment, and the Charlotte Motor Speedway, who are partnering with us, as well as great support from our state and local governments. So this has enabled us to announce this initiative that we're really excited about, this public-private partnership with the stated goal of delivering or administering 1 million vaccine doses to our community by July 4th, Independence Day. We didn't choose that by accident. We believe that this partnership will be a model for others to follow to allow us to get a step closer to independence from the grips of this vaccine.
So how are you getting it out there? You know, there are a lot of creative ideas, some people talking about 24/7 vaccination. I know in the UK, local pharmacies are distributing the vaccination. I could imagine, although it's South Carolina, not North Carolina, if you have a big plant like BMW does in Spartanburg, you could try and vaccinate everybody at the plant. What are you doing to get it out in force?
Absolutely. So, you know, it's a combination of all the above. We have our regular operations where we every single day are caring for our communities and patients through multiple standalone sites where we're delivering thousands of vaccines a day. This partnership where we can go to these well-known landmarks like Charlotte Motor Speedway and Bank of America Stadium where our Panthers play and do several thousand a day with the help of the city and with business to do that, we also believe is a key component. The other component that we are really focused on, and it's Martin Luther King Day today, is the disparities in care in our underserved communities. And we've really been leaders in creative, innovative ways to deliver to those communities, such as we are going to be having roving units, mobile units go out into these underserved communities and bring the vaccine to them to overcome some of the barriers around transportation and scheduling and those type of things. That's an area that at Atrium Health we are very focused in and frankly a bit concerned.
Well, you've got you talk about private-public partnerships, and you've got the private side covered with big corporations like Honeywell, big money like David Tepper. How about the public part? I mean, what's your communication like with the government, with the governor there? How is that partnership working?
Really outstanding. We are in continuous, when I say continuous, I mean continuous here the past week or several weeks with our state and local government, our public health department here locally, as well as Dr. Cohen at DHS, as well as Governor Cooper. And they have been great partners. We are feeding them information on a continuous basis about how many vaccines we need, how many vaccines we have administered, and they have been great at supplying the amount of vaccine that we need for our communities. Now, we need that to continue as we ramp up our processes, especially as we start to go to these mass events where we're not talking 10, 20,000 doses that we need on a day or week basis, but we're talking 50,000 and more. So I do worry about that supply chain, but the state has been great partners with us. We're in continuous communication.
What's your outlook then right now for the supply chain, Doctor?
Well, you know, so far so good is what I would say, and I'm a positive person. I'm gonna believe that's gonna continue because again, we all have the same goal here, and that is to get as many vaccines in the arms of our community so we can get to that herd immunity that we all hear so much about, and hopefully get back to some semblance of a normal life and rhythm, and back to doing the things that we love. You know, great stories are coming out of our vaccine events. We had last Friday, we opened up to the public 65 and older. We had a grandmother who came, received her vaccine, and broke down in tears because she realized that this was a significant step closer to her being able to hug her grandchildren. That's what we want to get back to, and that's why we're excited. I'm optimistic. Obviously, there's challenges. These partnerships will help. These mass events will help. The government has their role in those type of things, and we know our patients best, and we are experts at delivering and caring for our communities. So I'm optimistic, but there's a lot we still have to do and learn.
All right, so, you know, I'm optimistic as well, talking to you about North Carolina, but you know that there's a concern, a broader concern about underserved communities outside of North Carolina, outside of the U.S., outside of the Western world. Even if we get that herd immunity, you know, in the U.S. and Europe, if we don't vaccinate Africa, for example, you could see mutations coming back to bite us. Are you concerned about that, and do you hear of any solutions that you think are applicable?
I absolutely am, and what I'm really excited about are the trials that are ongoing right now that are bringing new and novel therapies to us to be able to treat our patients who have the virus in addition to the vaccine. So we have to ramp up production of the vaccines. We have to continue to develop them and get them out broadly across the entire world. But I'm equally excited about the novel. We have 9 trials going on at Atrium Health right now with new cutting-edge treatments to treat people who have coronavirus. So I think it's going to be a double-pronged approach. The vaccinations, well, triple actually, the safety, the wearing the mask, the hand washing, those type of things, and then these therapeutic things that are cutting edge coming out of which we have 9 trials going on right now showing promising results.
All right, so precautions, vaccinations, and treatment. Doctor, thanks so much for joining us. Dr. Scott Rissmiller, Atrium Health Chief Physician Officer, talking about what they're doing in North Carolina. Let's stick with the vaccine right now. I spoke earlier with the former UK Prime Minister, Tony Blair, about the relationship between current Prime Minister Johnson and President-elect Joe Biden, as well as the possibility of a vaccine passport.
One of the things that the American administration will be really keen to show is that multilateralism is back in fashion, and they're going to be working with European countries, with the UK, with other partners, in order to show that American leadership is back at that multilateral level.
I want to ask you what you would do were you in Joe Biden's position, and perhaps the British need a little bit of this as well. We have an extremely divisive or divided society in America, especially at a time when we're making this transition to power. President Donald Trump is the first living president in, I'm sure, over 100 years who has refused to go to the inauguration of his successor. What would you do if you were in Joe Biden's place in order to try and bring the country back together?
Well, there are two things. And the first thing he is clearly doing, which is using language of reconciliation, of reaching out, and it's in his nature. I mean, I've known Joe Biden for a long period of time. He's someone who, has genuinely got a good heart, good values. He can see the divisions of America, and he's made it his job as president. This is why he's, in a way, the right man in the right place at the right time to try and bring the country together. But the second thing, because this is not an American-specific problem, it's all over the world, it's to focus on delivery. And you've got an immediate focus with the pandemic. And the best way to overcome some of the divisions within society is to show that you're delivering for the people.
It strikes me that the best way for the economy would be to say, look, if you've had the vaccine, we'll find a way of denoting that, and then you can go to a restaurant or you can fly on a plane. But that might not be the best way for society.
Well, I'm sure that you're going to get to some form of health status passport. In my view, it's inevitable, because you're just not going to be able to get the economy, certainly in an international sense, going again unless you have that. But I think we've got to realize what the problem is that policymakers are facing. And it's really come about as a result of events of the last few weeks, when these new strains have arisen that are posing new challenges and are highly transmissible. And the problem is, for most policymakers around the world, they could see, months back, they could see three phases to this pandemic. The first phase is you lock down and you get the disease under control. The second phase is that you've got the disease under control, you've got restrictions, but you've got test and trace, and you're waiting for the vaccine. And then the third phase is vaccination. And people thought of vaccination as something you could do over a period of time, not at leisure, but at a moderate speed. What's happened is that second phase has collapsed under the pressure of recent spikes in infection. And really what you're faced with now, if you're a policymaker, is pretty much mass lockdown or mass vaccination. And what it's doing is it's putting enormous pressure on supply chains around the world, because those supply chains have not been geared up to accelerate in the way that governments now want. So I think what you're going to find, in fact, what you are finding, is a desperate scramble for vaccine, and for governments to realize that until you get a substantial part of the population vaccinated, ending lockdown can be very perilous.
That was the former UK Prime Minister Tony Blair talking to me and my co-anchor Anna Edwards this morning on the European Market Open. Let's check in first on the First Word News now with Leanne Gerrans in London. Leanne?
Hi, Matt. Two veteran regulators strongly backed by progressive Democrats have been picked to head two key Wall Street watchdogs. The former head of the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, Gary Gensler, will head the SEC. FTC member Rohit Chopra has been named to run the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Now, Joe Biden's inauguration speech on Wednesday will have several themes. The incoming president is expected to outline how he'll tackle the health and economic crisis he does inherit. At the same time, Biden will call on the U.S. to abandon the divisiveness stoked up by President Trump. He's been sworn in 2 weeks after the riots at Capitol Hill. Now, former Hong Kong lawmaker Ted Hui is stepping up his criticism of HSBC. He says the bank has failed to explain the legal reason for freezing his accounts after the pro-democracy activist fled the city for self-exile in the UK. According to Hui, HSBC CEO Noel Quinn wrote that the bank had no choice in blocking his accounts after a demand from police. HSBC has been criticized over support for China's tough new security laws. And the White House is planning a farewell for Donald Trump on Wednesday when he leaves Washington for the last time as president. Bloomberg News has seen a copy of the invitation. The event will take place at Joint Base Andrews, where the outgoing president will make his departure on Air Force One. It's scheduled for 4 hours before Joe Biden is sworn in. Global News 24 hours a day on air and at Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Leanne Gerrans. This is Bloomberg Math.
Leanne, thanks very much. Coming up, Mark Morial, President and CEO of the National Urban League, discusses Dr. Martin Luther King's legacy and Wednesday's inauguration of President-elect Joe Biden. This is Bloomberg.
Explore the trends, investments, and competition of the European ETF industry. Join us on Bloomberg ETF IQ Europe.
From Berlin, this is Bloomberg Markets. I'm Matt Miller. Today is, of course, Martin Luther King Day in the U.S., and with the country extremely divided, racial tensions are still continuing to heat up. Joining us now is National Urban League President and CEO Mark Morial. Mark, it's a day on which I think many of us hope we can find solutions to this division, but certainly 2020 looked like things are getting worse. How do you see it?
2020 was a consequential year, a year of pandemics, COVID, racial justice, the economy, and I think a pandemic of the American soul. Martin Luther King would be 92 today, and his words and his work, I think, are as relevant today as they've ever been. He would urge us to fight against the hate movement and the insurrection, and to bring people together around common values and common purpose. The values of brother and sisterhood, the values of equity and justice, the values of listening and hearing. He would counsel us to do that, but he would also counsel us not to simply be people who engage in meaningful conversation, but who also engage in meaningful action. So his words, I believe that the Martin Luther King quote that works best for now is that we've got to be not thermometers, but thermostats. We've got to set the tone, and we've got to set the temperature in America, and we've got to set that temperature at a level that allows people to forge ahead in a constructive and meaningful way. So Martin Luther King is, what makes him so special is that he is a man for all ages. And as we celebrate his work and his life today, I hope people will celebrate his words and his actions.
What do you hope to hear, Mark, from President-elect Biden when he addresses the country at his inauguration on Wednesday?
I expect to hear a distinct move to change the tone of discourse coming from the presidency. We've had 4 years of division, finger pointing, 4 years of coarse language, 4 years of endless personal attacks coming from Donald Trump. People want to turn the page because I think what we'll also hear from Joe Biden is a seriousness about confronting COVID, the economy, racial justice, climate change, the issues that affect the way we live in this country. We've seen a 4-year sort of reality show. It's been about watching the show. I think the Biden administration is going to be about working to better life for people. It's going to be about the American people, not about the presidency and the president's whims or feelings or slights. So I think we'll see a definitive change in tone, and also I think a commitment to purpose, an understanding of the times that we're in, but the need for us to act. Joe Biden is an experienced president. He's got the kind of legislative experience we saw from a Lyndon Johnson. I think you're going to see a presidency determined to get off to a fast start with a strong speech, but also with definitive executive actions in the first 100 days that are really designed to change the direction of the nation.
You know, not only, Mark, did the COVID pandemic in health terms hit Black communities and people of color harder than it did other communities, but in economic terms, we're seeing that it's hurt them more as well in terms of the economic shutdown, losing jobs, lower pay, et cetera. What do you want to see to turn that around on the other side when we start to see America, recover, so to speak?
So I always say that the economic pain has been shared by all Americans of all backgrounds and races, but the economic pain that Black Americans and Brown Americans have faced has been more severe. An unemployment rate that is now back in double digits, small businesses which have closed at twice the rate. The pain is broad but much deeper in Black and Brown communities. What we need is economic intentionality, not only a recognition of that, but to make, if you will, capital access a high priority in the new administration for Black businesses, to ensure that extended unemployment benefits and workforce investment dollars and programs are targeted to communities where the unemployment rates and the economic pain is the highest. Those are urban communities and suburban and rural, but Black and Brown communities. So I think the most important word is targeted policies that are heavily focused on the areas where the pain is deepest. We've shared a number of ideas with the incoming Biden economic transition team, and it is my hope that they're going to embrace some of the ideas that the Urban League has long championed. This is about creating a tide that will lift all boats, and a tide that will also unstick the boats that are stuck at the bottom of the sea. We've got work to do in order to do that, and I think a broad, targeted investment plan, COVID relief plan, an economic recovery and infrastructure plan is what the nation needs. And we'll be working closely with the Biden administration and the Congress to ensure that it has.
Okay, guys, it's time to play Stop on Profit for British Pound. So if you're following me, you need to play Stop on Profit at 135.37. Okay?
Have talked a lot about boosting their diversity numbers. Are those words translating into action?
It's fair to say that there's been a renewed energy from a number of financial services CEOs, but it's also fair to say that the work ahead is so substantial because the diversity numbers have been tepid and they have been weak. The truth is that we will have to judge by results. So while I'm encouraged by the commitment and actions, I've had conversations with Jamie Dimon and Charlie Sharp and David Solomon, Brian Moynihan, just to name a few big business financial services CEOs who are committed, but we're going to continue to push them on hiring, on creating business opportunities, on home ownership. Closing the economic divide is the issue for 21st century America. If we can close the economic divide, the benefits for all are going to be substantial. Wall Street's got to lead. Wall Street's got to demonstrate that its words of 2020 are going to translate into significant actions. And so we'll be pushing, offering ideas, but also working to hold all accountable.
All right. Mark, thanks so much. Mark Morial there, President and CEO of the National Urban League.
Y ver cómo te tiran algún objeto o cómo notas la sensación, ¿no? Como que te golpean a ti. Yo creo que hace que empatices mucho con los personajes y que sea todo mucho más real.
market that over the past few weeks has made it clear it wants to go higher. It got a little spooked by the idea that geopolitical tensions are rising.
From Berlin, I'm Matt Miller. Welcome to Bloomberg Markets. Checking on what's going on in finance in the financial world today. Remember that it's Martin Luther King Day, so it's a holiday in the U.S. No equities or bonds are trading. We do see futures down a little bit. S&P futures off almost 0.1%. You see even less action in the live markets. The Stocks Europe 600 is our broader benchmark here in Europe. It's really not moving much. Investors are waiting for more cues on the vaccine rollout and Joe Biden's stimulus plan. The dollar index is where it's at, really. A lot of talk about what the Fed is going to do with inflation, if it comes back, which way we're going to see quantitative easing or the bond buying program go, if it holds steady. Right now, the dollar spot index at 90.94. And then, of course, Bitcoin, always fun to talk about, especially with the volatility. I say I've been talking about Bitcoin for about 8 years now. And at one point, I remember you could buy Bitcoin in my reporting career for $75. So $37,068 is still a pretty high price for this digital asset. Let's get now to the latest on the political situation here in Europe. Speaking of volatility, we have another flare-up in Italy. Italian Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte faces a confidence vote in the lower house of parliament today and faces a similar vote in the Senate tomorrow, where he has less room for error. Joining us out of Brussels, the European capital, is Bloomberg's Maria Taddeo. And Maria, there are people who are dedicated simply to covering the Italian volatility. This is a country that's had, I think, more political regimes than any other in the Western world since World War II.
Yeah, well, Matt, there's a lot of volatility. I personally love it, but to say right now, this is a very delicate and a serious note situation for the Italian government and for Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte, who is speaking, as you mentioned, before lawmakers today in the lower house. We know that he's going to get a majority on that vote. What really matters will be the Senate tomorrow, and this is a delicate situation because he is really trying to hunt votes from everywhere. He wants to cling on to this majority. And today he is, just to give you an idea of the speech that he's making, he's saying we need to remember that we're in the midst of a pandemic, that we really do need national unity at this point. And he's also hinting that perhaps he would be willing to delegate more if tomorrow he wins that vote in the Senate. Because remember, Matt, a lot of the criticism towards Giuseppe Conte is really around this idea that he has amassed a lot of power in a crazy way. You know, he has a recovery fund, he has the emergency powers pegged to coronavirus, and he's also popular. When you look at Italian politicians, he's still polling #1. So that means that for everyone else, Giuseppe Conte is not really leaving a lot of room for other parties, for other political figures to emerge. And that has created tensions, especially in the center left of the political spectrum. Now, as I said, the big question will be tomorrow, that vote in the Senate. It's unclear which way it's going to go. If you look at the Italian press that is close to Giuseppe Conte, they say that he will get the votes, that he can still cling on to those votes. But again, when you look at the maths, it's not so clear. And just as a final point, Matt, the timeline here is also further complicated by the fact that the president of the Italian Republic is also going to be reelected. And after July, he won't be able to call an election. So if there was to be an election, it needs to happen in the next few weeks. And this is happening in the midst of a pandemic, which to some extent means that the prospect of a snap vote is moving further away because it would be very difficult logistically to do a national election in these conditions.
All right, Maria, thanks very much. Maria Taddeo there talking about the Italian government. We've had 61 separate Italian prime ministers since 1946. Let's get more on Italy. Strategists at Goldman Sachs are warning bondholders, seeing central bank support shielding them from a flare-up of political turbulence in Rome starting to wane. And indeed, Italian bonds today, the 10-year up 3.5 basis points, the biggest gainers as investors sell of any European debt. Vasilios Giannakis, Bank Lombard ODA Global Head of FX Strategy, joins me now. Vasilios, how do you see the situation? Is it one that, because the markets have seemed pretty sanguine until today, that we should be concerned about?
Well, look, there's definitely an element of uncertainty as far as the political instability is concerned in Italy, but there are all other sorts of things that are going out in the currency market, and especially in the euro. We're in the midst of the pandemic, as you mentioned. That being said, we're in the midst of a global growth recovery and a sharper one than expected in global trade. So all these things are really going to blend in. I think in the short term, this definitely induces an element of uncertainty and therefore some downside risk in the euro. But I think from a medium-term perspective, the fundamentals on an aggregate, on a euro area-wide angle are definitely somewhat positive on the euro.
Positive on the euro, does that mean that you see continued dollar weakness?
Position closed on British pound and pound 35.37. Just right here, as you can see. Okay, it took us how long? It took us around 2 hours to make a profit. Okay, guys, well done. If you follow trades, you need to close position at this level.
15% depending on which trade weighted index you're looking at. The dollar is overvalued relative to, for example, real yield differentials. That being said, is less overvalued than it was before. There is already a lot of the optimism embedded in the price in a number of, especially G10 currencies. So we still have some room further to go as far as dollar weakness is concerned, but we're not going to fall off a cliff.
I wonder what you think about the dollar versus the pound. The cable rate right now is at 135.5. There was so much talk about it rising to 145 once a Brexit deal was, once a post-Brexit trade deal was achieved. That never happened, and now it looks like it's on a downward trajectory.
Well, first of all, I think this recent downward trajectory is not idiosyncratic to the UK. It's just, broad-based, modest dollar strength, which I think largely because of technical reasons and to a certain extent positioning adjustment. Now, as far as sterling is concerned, our view has been that at 130 or thereabouts, it didn't reflect the Brexit deal. 135 to 137 and 138 was probably a fair level for value to be trading if you consider that we would have a Brexit deal, but at the same time we would also be facing the structural headwinds emanating from departure from the European Union. So in that respect, I think sterling is going to remain supported because of dollar downside, but I don't think that it's going to make any significant headwind because there is a lot of structural headwinds that the UK economy is going to be facing.
Let me finally ask you about the Swissy. Do you see investors seeking safe haven there? Are they concerned, maybe over the longer run, Vasilios, about the amount of debt that's piling up in other Western economies?
Well, that's the amount of debt, that's certainly an element, although I would suspect that the concern is definitely alleviated by the fact that we are running on quite low levels of yields. That being said, what we've been seeing in general in Switzerland is, one, an inability of Euro-Swiss to be able to chase euro-dollar higher because there is a big discrepancy, big divergence between of them. And the second thing, which is very interesting, over the past 2-3 quarters, we've started seeing some portfolio outflows from Switzerland to the rest of the world and predominantly in the Eurozone. Now, that would suggest that the Swiss should actually weaken. That being said, it seems that the outflows so far have not been strong enough to recycle a large chunk of the current account surplus that Switzerland is running. So bottom line, modest upside in Euro-Swiss. We forecast around 110. It's going to be a very slow and a very stubborn grind higher, but very, very slow.
You know, I almost forgot for a moment Bitcoin, and I think of this, I've always thought of it as a currency because I used Bitcoin to buy food and beer and video games. Do you think of it as more of an asset, though, as a commodity, Vasilios? Does it even enter your universe?
No. No, well, obviously we have to monitor what's been happening because we have to inform our clients, to disseminate our views, but I don't see it as an asset. I don't see it as a currency. It just doesn't resonate with me and the view that I have that, for example, currencies need to be backed by a credible institution, and this is by no means the case for Bitcoin or any other cryptocurrency, at least so far. I mean, in the future, that may be the case, but not at the moment.
All right, Vasilios, just had to throw it. I always love to ask the Bitcoin question of FX strategists, but typically they say, as you do, this is not a currency, and that's what we hear from central bankers as well. Vasilios Giannakis of Bank Lombard Odier, where he is the global head of FX strategy. Thanks for joining us on this Martin Luther King Day. Let's check in now with Leanne Gerrans for your first word news. Leanne?
Hi, Matt. Joe Biden is signaling his administration will be tougher on banks. He has picked a pair of veteran regulators to lead two key Wall Street watchdogs. The former head of the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, Gary Gensler, will head the SEC. FTC member Rohit Chopra is being named to run the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Now, federal authorities are reportedly conducting insider threat screening on 25,000 National Guard troops coming to Washington for the inauguration. According to the Washington Post, they are concerned about extremism among the soldiers. A number of pro-Trump rioters who stormed the Capitol turned out to have links to the military. Now, in China, the economy exceeded its pre-pandemic growth rates in the fourth quarter. GDP rose 6.5% in the final quarter from a year earlier. For all of 2020, China's economy grew 2.3%. That is at a time when other major peers such as the US and Japan did contract. And the US and the European Union have condemned Russia's decision to detain opposition leader Alexei Navalny. Russian police took Navalny into custody when he arrived in Moscow after being treated in Germany for poisoning. Authorities say he's been accused of violating the terms of a suspended sentence. Navalny is an outspoken critic of Russian President Vladimir Putin. Now, the White House is planning a farewell for Donald Trump on Wednesday when he leaves Washington for the last time as president. Bloomberg News has seen a copy of the invitation. The event will take place at Joint Base Andrews, where the outgoing president will make his departure on Air Force One. It's scheduled for 4 hours before Joe Biden is actually sworn in. Global News 24 hours a day on air and at Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Leanne Gerrans. This is Bloomberg. Matt.
Leanne, thanks very much. Now, coming up, the party of German Chancellor Angela Merkel has selected a new leader for the years to come. Whether or not that leader runs in the September elections is an open question. We'll look into Armin Laschet and how he's going to lead the CDU next. This is Bloomberg.
China continues to be, recovering well. And with the opening up that was decided at the last 5-year plan, that is a golden opportunity for many international banks.
So we'll look to double our footprint across IB and also wealth management and asset management in the 3 to 5 year time frame.
Growth outlook structurally is very strong, but it does need to consolidate and allow time to help the share price appreciation to move more in sync with the growth.
So China can avoid further decoupling if they stop these inappropriate actions.
But at the moment, we really want to see the dust settle first on international relationships, on China's role in the global economy.
I don't see a likelihood of a big change in the policy with the change of administrations.
Bloomberg has enhanced search on the terminal to deliver what you need when you need it. Now, you can simply type phrases in everyday English in the command line. Compare financials, find people, analyze markets. You can enter phrases or ask questions. What do you want to know today? Ask a question or visit SearchGo to find answers now.
This is the 1980s all over again, to make sure that we keep our hands firmly on the driving wheel.
I do not see demand coming back to the pre-COVID level anywhere earlier than the end of 2022.
If that happens and we see a demand recovery, then I think the market can absorb it.
I think what we've seen during this period of time is that communicating via video is not a fad. We are using it in all aspects of our lives, for work, for learning, for communicating, for staying in touch.
Give you a sense of the real-time action, the 10-year yield tumbling now 11 basis points, so continuing in this knee-jerk risk-off feel.
From Berlin, this is Bloomberg Markets. I'm Matt Miller. Germany's dominant party voted for continuity on Saturday by electing Armin Laschet as leader, opting for the candidate who most resembles outgoing Chancellor Angela Merkel in terms of policy and political style.
There are many people who think Angela Merkel is good first and the CDU second. The Chancellor's reputation among people here and internationally can be summed up in one word: trust. We now need this trust as a party, but this trust is not a gift or an inheritance.
Joining us now is Bloomberg's Agatha Cantrill. She's been covering the virtual CDU convention for us. And Agatha, this seems to have been a safe choice for a party that has gained credibility through this pandemic.
Yes, I think it's a safe choice on the basis that they picked Merkel loyalists, but also because a lot of the support that the party has got during the pandemic has actually been chalked up to Merkel's own strategy during the pandemic and the broader appreciation of her in comparison to other world leaders in her handling of it. And so I think it makes sense to seek out someone who can try and continue her legacy and be seen as some sort of steady hand and centrist, stable candidate in the center of Europe. He isn't, however, necessarily going to be their chancellor candidate. However, having the basis of him being the party leader means that they're obviously wanting to continue Merkel's legacy into the next administration.
He also didn't necessarily have the greatest policy, or at least not a steady policy for his own state, Nordrhein-Westphalia, through the pandemic, did he?
No, he didn't. He was seen as a bit too laissez-faire when it came to the coronavirus initially, and that was especially thrown to light when there was an outbreak at the Tunis abattoir in July last year. But in other ways, he's really held to Merkel's line on a lot of different policies, and he's very centrist and very pro-European, very pro-Emmanuel Macron, and for those reasons I think he appealed to the centrists of the CDU. He is, however, a bit different from, he's going to continue Merkel's line on things like Nord Stream, which might actually create some issues in Washington, D.C., if that is continuing to be the CDU's line ahead of the next administration, because as we see at the moment, with Navalny coming back to Russia and the Nord Stream 2 pipeline still being supported by the German government, this is obviously being thrown into question by DC.
Yeah, absolutely. With Navalny coming back to Russia to be arrested, right, after there was an attempted assassination on the Putin opponent. He is then arrested by the Russian state when he returns. Agatha Cantrill, thanks very much for joining us on that. Let's get more on the future of the Christian Democrats. For that, we're joined by Bloomberg Opinion's Andreas Kluth. And Andreas, this is a party that's expected to in some way, in some coalition form, remain in power, at least now, right? They've just elected kind of a ho-hum candidate, but as Aggie said, he may not be their pick for chancellor in September.
That's correct, Matt. And, you know, the German nickname, get ready for a long word, for the CDU has always been Kanzlerwahlverein, a club for the election of chancellors, which tells you that the soul is not ideological consistency or anything, but just success at the ballot. So that's what it's about. And the other thing you have to know is it's an unusual, the conservative bloc in Germany consists of two parties, one that exists only in Bavaria and is called CSU, and the larger one that exists everywhere else is called CDU. And they nominate one candidate and then hope to do well. And at the moment, and together they're called the Union, at the moment the Union is polling very well. They're, in part because of COVID, people do trust them, so they're clearly ahead of every other party. And so I think they will, first of all, be able to prevent a coalition of the three left parties for sure, but they'll probably lead the next government. And the question is, who will be their top candidate? And the other question is, in a coalition with what other party? Because they'll need at least one.
Yeah, I think it's easier if we just call them the Union. People from outside of Germany get thrown by the C, by the Christian. Of course, the lion's share of Germans don't go to church. I think it's only less than 10% of Germans actually go to church on a Sunday. Andreas, the interesting thing that I found in your piece, and I encourage people to go to Bloomberg.com and check out the opinion site to read that, is that we could see the Union join forces with the Greens. Now, here you have kind of the party of dad, right? As you can see from all of the dads giving each other elbow bumps, and AKK on stage there in the most uncool way, teaming up with the party of like hippies that just got out of their drum circle. How is that possible?
It would have been unthinkable a couple of decades ago, because as you said, the Greens were not just came from the anti-nuclear, but also the student movement and the free love movement, and at some point even had a pedophilic wing long ago, I have to say. Whereas the Christian Union parties, their original base was that their color is black, because the robes of the clergy, their original base was the Catholic parties and the Protestant parties of the Weimar Republic. So they could not have, nobody could have imagined this, but they've both grown up, or the Greens have grown up, got over their hippie phase, cut their hair, and have moderated. And in fact, the Union and the Greens already govern together at various state levels, municipal levels, and city levels, and they're doing that very well. And I think with Laschet and other people now in control of the Conservatives, I can see this going pretty smoothly and easily, and I think it would be good for Germany, in fact, if these two parties got together for the first time at a federal level.
Well, and as we're seeing here from the intraday moves in the DAX and the Bund, it certainly hasn't moved markets one iota. Definitely the smooth choice. I encourage viewers to check out Andreas's column. You can, if you have a Bloomberg in front of you, just type OPIN GO to see Andreas' work and the work of his colleagues as well. Thanks very much, Andreas Kluth, for joining us. Coming up, we're going to check on how the distribution of vaccines is going in the Washington, D.C. area. The head of one of Virginia's largest hospital systems joins us next. This is Bloomberg.
我开始做直播是在今年年初的时候，那主要是去年的话，可能参加更多的是线下的活动。今年大家都知道，由于中国的这个疫情，导致这些线下活动不能办了，所以更多的交流方式在线上。就今年春节之后，主要是开始在线上通过直播的方式跟粉丝进行交流。直播可能对于投资者来说是陪伴投资者，大家讲讲市场啊，讲讲投资的心理啊，这样的话就可以让大家在投资的时候，心情更平缓。平缓的话，能做到长期持有；长期持有的话，才可能赚钱。相对而言，线上可能覆盖的人群更多，因为可能疫情，很多人在家里看直播的人更多。反而可能，我这个工作可能是反而是受益于疫情的一个工作吧。
明天希望高开赚钱，
祝大家赚大钱。
Access the financial world on demand. Hear from leading economists, policymakers, and industry experts via live and on-demand webinars, only from Bloomberg. Start exploring to see what's moving the markets. Visit Bloomberg.com/webinars.
I'm David Weston. Bloomberg Television is reinventing one of the most iconic brands in financial television for a new audience. Join me to see the news program for the clever investor. This is Bloomberg Wall Street Week.
From Berlin, gentlemen, this is Bloomberg Markets. I'm Matt Miller on this Martin Luther King holiday. U.S. equity and bond markets are not trading, of course, today. S&P futures are little changed, as are the live cash trade that we see here in Europe, as is the live cash trade we see here in Europe, as are the indexes across Europe. Here you can see the benchmark, the broader benchmark stock 600 is only up by 0.06%. So not a lot of movement there. It's the dollar that really was the talk of the markets this morning, and I guess your call on the dollar is going to decide a lot in your portfolio. Right now we see the dollar rising, although the consensus is still for continued weakness in the greenback. Bitcoin, by the way, rising, only $560 right now, though, to 36,819. More than 42 million doses of the vaccine have been administered around the globe in an historic campaign, despite unequal access and varying degrees of efficacy. For more on how the distribution is going in the Washington, D.C. area, we welcome Dr. J. Stephen Jones, the CEO of Innova Health. They serve 2 million patients a year in Northern Virginia. But, Doctor, I'm betting you hope to vaccinate a heck of a lot more than that. Tell us how the rollout is going for you in Virginia.
It's been something of an up and down experience, Matt. I think what we saw originally is that the development of these vaccines is, to me, science at its best. To have that rapid development of vaccines this effective and this safe is something that I don't think any of us had expectations that high. That's been great. The rollout itself has, of course, been extremely bumpy from the early days of pretty much a lack of communication between federal leadership and the state and local entities that were tasked with giving the vaccines. And then even at this point, it's on a day-to-day. We feel like there's a significant discrepancy in the information we get with what actually happens on the ground.
So what are you at Innova doing to help to help the efficiency of this rollout improve and to bump the speed a little bit?
I think transparency and communication are going to be the absolute keys to success here. Again, we've demonstrated science that's as high as any that's happened probably on the planet, combining that with operational challenges, which are very, very real. And that transparency, knowing where the doses are right now, is our biggest challenge, Matt, is that you just mentioned there are supposedly 40 million plus vaccines that have been distributed, and we can't tell where they are. And as we get the press reports, theoretically, there were half as many doses held back as were originally distributed. That now turns out to reportedly not be the case. We were supposed to be seeing ramping up of production. So we were expecting to be seeing more vaccines come our way in January and February. And so far, it's exactly the opposite. We're seeing fewer vaccines coming our way, actually, as we get into the first couple of weeks here. So transparency and communication are going to have to improve significantly.
So where do they need improvement? I mean, we know that there's a new resident moving into the White House. How has communication been on a federal level? How has communication been on a state level? Do you speak with the governor, for example?
We spoke with the governor just last week. I'm pleased to say that our governor, Northam, has committed to transparency to that concept in the Commonwealth. And I think that'll be very helpful. I made it very clear we'll let any appropriate entity, whether it be elected officials or anyone from government, walk straight to our freezers and count the number of doses. And we believe it's important that everyone in America who has those doses should be willing to demonstrate that transparency, because as they sit there every single day, over 2,500 Americans are dying of this terrible disease. So days matter here a lot.
How many days do you think it's going to be, Doctor, until you've got the kind of cover that you want in terms of this vaccine?
I wish I could tell you that, Matt, because right now we have such low visibility. So for example, we have fewer than 3 days worth of vaccines on hand right now, and vaccinating 3,500 to 4,000 people a day here at Innova. We've got a shipment that should come today, but the bottom line is that if it doesn't, in 2 days, we're going to have to start scaling back. One of the biggest challenges that's not evident is because these are 2-dose regimens. is that we've been told that the second dose was held back across the board. So far, that's not turned out to be the case. So we're reaching a point where if we don't get the shipments we expect within the next couple of days, we'll start having to stop first dose injections to assure that we have every single second dose that's required of those who've already been injected. That'll be a real disappointment if we have to turn that machine back.
Well, and I mean, the clinical trials were done with a distinct time period in between the first and the second dose, right? Although a lot of countries, including the UK, I know, are just going ahead with the first dose and saying the second dose may be delayed. Are you concerned about that approach?
As a research scientist, I believe deeply you have to follow the data, and the studies were designed as they were designed. We can't know right now, would they have worked as well with a different dosing schedule? We can guess all we want, but guessing in science is not necessarily the best approach. So we will do our best to make sure that everyone who had the first dose gets the second dose unless we have some scientific reason given to us to change that regimen.
Let me ask you finally about the effects of the vaccine. Of course, everyone is encouraged to take it when he or she can, but there have been some negative reports about especially elderly recipients in Scandinavia. That's what we're seeing now, right? How do we know how the very young are going to react to this vaccine? Because I'm not sure how many trial results we saw for under 18, under 17-year-old kids.
These vaccines have not been studied in children. So again, we have to guess in that population. And I'm certainly not here to guess on that. I think what we do know is that if we can get large numbers of adults who are in appropriate eligible groups vaccinated, we will do two things. One is that we'll protect almost every single one of those, not only from this terrible disease, again, over 2,500 Americans dying every single day. We do that, but we also keep them out of the health system, which is currently severely overtaxed across the world, of course. So that's the important part. The second part we hope to get is herd immunity, and there's been plenty in the press. I think people are now comfortable with that concept. We're a long, long ways from that right now, but developing that herd immunity is another opportunity. I'm real concerned, Matt, about vaccine hesitancy. You know, the science on this is so strong. In our personal experience, we've vaccinated over 40,000 people at ANOVA already, and the number of severe reactions has been in the tiny handful. And, you know, unless something's zero, it'll always generate a good headline. We had one single patient out of all those who did require overnight hospitalization. Having said that, I walk through the vaccine center every single day, and I walk through the area where people are waiting for the 15 minutes after they had their first vaccine, or first or second vaccine. And the bottom line is, I like to joke, it's the most boring part of my day because the people in there are sitting comfortably and look incredibly bored for the most part. Again, we see occasional reactions, but we see lots and lots of real deaths from this disease. The balance in that math is just too straightforward to have vaccine hesitancy.
Well, I'm sure for every one person that's hesitant, there are 10 people clamoring to get that dose. Dr. Jones, thanks so much for joining us. Dr. J. Stephen Jones, Innova Health CEO, talking to us about the importance and the problems of the vaccine rollout. Let's stick with that topic. I spoke earlier with the UK Prime Minister, former UK Prime Minister Tony Blair, about the British relationship with the U.S., the relationship between Prime Minister Johnson and President-elect Joe Biden, and about the possibility of a vaccine passport.
One of the things that the American administration will be really keen to show is that multilateralism is back in fashion, and they're going to be working with European countries, with the UK, with other partners, in order to show that American leadership is back at that multilateral level.
I want to ask you what you would do were you in Joe Biden's position, and perhaps the British need a little bit of this as well. We have an extremely divisive or divided society in America, especially at a time when we're making this transition to power. President Donald Trump is the first living president in, I'm sure, over 100 years who has refused to go to the inauguration of his successor. What would you do if you were in Joe Biden's place in order to try and bring the country back together?
Well, there are two things. And the first thing he is clearly doing, which is using language of reconciliation, of reaching out, and it's in his nature. I mean, known Joe Biden for a long period of time. He's someone who, has genuinely got a good heart, good values. He can see the divisions of America, and he's made it his job as president. This is why he's, in a way, the right man in the right place at the right time to try and bring the country together. But the second thing, because this is not an American-specific problem, it's all over the world, it's to focus on delivery. And you've got an immediate focus with the pandemic. And the best way to overcome some of the divisions within society is to show that you're delivering for the people.
It strikes me that the best way for the economy would be to say, look, if you've had the vaccine, we'll find a way of denoting that, and then you can go to a restaurant or you can fly on a plane. But that might not be the best way for society.
Well, I'm sure that you're going to get to some form of health status passport. In my view, it's inevitable, because you're just not going to be able to get the economy, certainly in an international sense, going again unless you have that. But I think we've got to realize what the problem is that policymakers are facing. And it's really come about as a result of events of the last few weeks, when these new strains have arisen that are posing new challenges and are highly transmissible. And the problem is, for most policymakers around the world, they could see, months back, they could see 3 phases to this pandemic. The first phase is you lock down and you get the disease under control. The second phase is that you've got the disease under control, you've got restrictions, but you've got test and trace, and you're waiting for the vaccine. And then the third phase is vaccination, and people thought of vaccination as something you could do over a period of time, not at leisure, but at a moderate speed. What's happened is that second phase has collapsed under the pressure of recent spikes in infection. And really what you're faced with now, if you're a policymaker, is pretty much mass lockdown or mass vaccination. And what it's doing is it's putting enormous pressure on supply chains around the world, because those supply chains have not been geared up to accelerate in the way that governments now want. So I think what you're going to find, in fact, what you are finding, is a desperate scramble for vaccine, and for governments to realize that until you get a substantial part of the population vaccinated, ending lockdown can be very perilous.
And that was former UK Prime Minister Tony Blair speaking with me and my co-anchor on the European Morning Open, Anna Edwards. Now, with the first word news, let's get over to Leanne Gerrans. Leanne?
Thanks, Matt. 2 veteran regulators, strongly backed by progressive Democrats, have been picked to head 2 key Wall Street watchdogs. The former head of the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, Gary Gensler, will head the SEC. FTC member Rohit Chopra is being named to run the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Now, Joe Biden's inauguration speech on Wednesday will have several themes. The incoming president is expected to outline how he'll tackle the health and economic crisis he does inherit. At the same time, Biden will call on the U.S. to abandon the divisiveness stoked by President Trump. He's been sworn in 2 weeks after the riot at the Capitol. And in Italy, Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte may not have enough votes in Parliament to halt political turmoil. He's likely to win a confidence vote in the lower house today, but he could face a similar vote tomorrow in the Senate, where former ally Matteo Renzi has withdrawn his support. Conte's government may survive that vote, but failing to win an outright majority would weaken him. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and at Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Leanne Gerrans. This is Bloomberg. Matt.
Leanne, thanks very much. Coming up, we speak to the president of the United Auto Workers about President-elect Biden.
generation's biggest problem.
Climate change is happening.
And the world's most innovative solutions.
Transport, industry, buildings, electricity, all of those things.
Everything you need to know about our changing environment, the politics of global warming.
We can and we will deal with climate change.
In the fight against climate change, Bloomberg Green has you covered.
This is Bloomberg Best, your weekly review of the most important business news, analysis, and interviews from Bloomberg Television around the world.
Ken Burns, welcome to Bloomberg Big Decisions.
We have always been a mixture of things. We are always stronger for that mixture.
Growth is a way to stay competitive, delight more and more consumers.
Are you worried that people won't take the vaccine?
We remain concerned about vaccine hesitancy.
What is one word of advice you'll take with you?
Learn how to listen. And that is certainly something that has served me well.
Ankiti, where do you go from here? It's a huge market, it's a huge opportunity. I want to go 100x from here.
Our philosophy is to partner where we can and stand apart when we should.
It's really a reminder, isn't it, just how sensitive the markets are to any commentary about trade. We did see some pressure on the yuan, we did see some pressure on the futures. That is now being reversed.
Valuations, particularly, sort of the technology landscape, have gotten to some pretty extraordinary levels. So I think it's not a surprise. I don't think it's any indication of the beginning of the end, but I do think markets don't like uncertainty.
From Berlin, this is Bloomberg Markets. I'm Matt Miller. Stellantis, the car maker formed from the merger of Fiat Chrysler Automobiles and PSA Group, gained in its first day of trading after completing a more than 2-year effort to form what is now one of the world's largest vehicle manufacturers. I want to get the perspective on that, as well as the correlation between labor and civil rights activists as we await a new president, as we await the inauguration of a new president after a year of division. Joining us now is United Auto Workers President Rory Gamble. And why don't we start on the latter, Rory, as it is Martin Luther King Day. It was a very divided year, filled with strife because of the inequality in the U.S. The Black Lives Matter movement stood up and was fought back against as well. What role does labor play in the civil rights movement today?
Labor's role and the civil rights movement, they march like hand in hand. The founding principles of both are based on equality and equal opportunity for all. In our labor agreements, we ensure that that really supported the civil rights movement early on. In its early days, labor partnered with the civil rights movement, with Martin Luther King. We provided resources and bodies to the cause. Right at our headquarters in Detroit, Martin Luther King was given office space. During that time, it is very well documented that he wrote his "I Have a Dream" speech right there at our offices in Detroit on Jefferson Avenue. We're very proud of that. So the labor movement, the civil rights movement have advanced each other consistently and brought a lot of economic parity to many working families in this country.
Now, Rory, I used to cover the auto industry very closely up until 2016, when I moved here to Germany, Detroit was making a comeback. What is the state of the Detroit auto workers right now?
Well, we're doing good in spite of the rough pandemic times. Our sales did not take as hard of a hit as a lot of people thought. We're building plants. We're building a brand new FCA plant right here in Detroit that's going to employ over 5,000 people. Many of those being employed will be Detroiters with a mix of current UAW members. At the end of the day, all of those jobs will be unionized or recognized jobs with a collective bargaining agreement that will ensure standards of living. So that is something that is significant, something that more people need to realize in this country, that working families need to have a voice. They need to have a mechanism where they can advance standards of living, wages, benefits, job security. And you do that through an organized voice with a collective bargaining agreement. And that is something that I'm very happy to hear that Joe Biden understands very well.
Now, Rory, you know, back in those times when I moved here, globalization was on the rise, and in the last 4 years, you've really seen a breakdown of global trade in a lot of places. Certainly, with Donald Trump's trade war against China, how has that affected the auto industry?
Well, it's put us on a teeter-totter, so to speak, with a lot of part supply insecurities and things like that. And eventually we'll find going forward that the American public will be the ones who are taxed in doing those efforts, and they did very little to help. We want fairness. We want a balanced playing field. We want to make sure that our products can compete on a very competitive and fair level with the rest of the world. And that's all you can basically ask for. And we're confident that our products can do that.
You know, we're showing some video here of electric cars being produced. We hear they take far fewer people to build. Are you concerned about the coming wave of EV production?
You know, we're watching it very close. We see a slower transition into EVs completely than some people. We see a mix, so to speak, of gas, internal combustion engine vehicles and electric vehicles and autonomous vehicles going forward over a period of time. On the offset, we see job creation with the EV market, but we're very cautious and optimistic, and we're moving very protectively into that. It's coming. It behooves us to make the most of it. But I'm very happy to hear that President-elect Joe Biden is very conscious of that as well. And he wants to see those future jobs be American-made, unionized jobs with great wages so that Americans can provide for and support their families with the coming new technology.
You mentioned FCA, Rory. There's nothing I miss more about the United States of America, about living over there, than my pickup truck. Right now I'm dreaming about getting a Ram TRX or a Power Wagon, if only they would sell them over here. But now I see that, and of course FCA is no stranger to foreign leaders. You had Sergio Marchionne over there in Detroit. He was a big fan of the city. Now you've got Carlos Tavares coming in because of the creation of Stellantis. What do you think of this new merger, a new boss coming into town?
Well, our members are protective. We have successor clauses in our agreements that protects their bargained wages and benefits. And we've gone through mergers, related to Chrysler. So our collective bargaining agreements are protected with language that ensures what we've agreed upon with the earlier company transfers to the new one. I've been in constant discussions with FCA leadership about the coming merger. There's some things we like, there's some things we don't like, but I'm confident that going forward, we'll be able to sit down and have those very productive discussions that ensure that our members and the employees of the new company are going to be protected. They're going to have very fruitful and bountiful employment that is going to continue to advance them in this country.
Well, we can definitely see and understand your priorities. Rory Gamble, thank you so much for your time on this Martin Luther King holiday, president of the United Auto Workers Union. This is Bloomberg.
explore the trends, investments, and competition of the European ETF industry. Join us on Bloomberg ETF IQ Europe.
2 p.m. in London, that means it's 9 a.m. in New York. From London, I'm Guy Johnson. Welcome to Bloomberg Markets. Happy Martin Luther King Day. That means we're seeing super light volume in most assets today because the United States is out. U.S. markets are closed. This is the picture, though. Stock 600 near session highs here in Europe. But as I say, super light volumes. S&P futures absolutely flat. Big day tomorrow with Janet Yellen going to be giving testimony on the Hill. We're waiting to see exactly what she has to say, the incoming Treasury Secretary on the dollar. The dollar is a little bid today. We're up by around 1/10% on the Bloomberg Dollar Index. And Brent giving a little bit back. But as you can see, really tight ranges today. Really tight ranges. And there's European politics to throw in, plus the virus. All of these factors are going to play a really big part in this week's trading as we work our way through the Yellen hearing. We've got the inauguration coming up. We've got some key votes in Italy coming up over the next couple of days. The Italian Prime Minister, Giuseppe Conte, facing two key votes of confidence. The first one comes today. The more important one comes tomorrow. Coalition instability now pushing yields higher. BTPs rising the most since October. In fact, strategists at Goldman Sachs are warning bondholders. They're basically saying that current central bank support, shielding them from a flare-up in political turbulence in Rome, well, it might not be enough. Let's bring in Bloomberg's Laura Cooper for more. Laura, do we need to start pricing back in political risk to the BTP market? We haven't had to do it for a while because the ECB's been there.
Well, I think certainly we are seeing pressure kind of feed through the BTP market, but even so, that Bund BTP spread, which is a traditional proxy of risk in the region, does remain at exceptionally low levels. It's been trading near that 5-year low. So I think given the fact that the ECB backdrop is so strong, I do expect that that is going to be contained. But certainly I would expect we're going to see some pressure on that. It's really markets have essentially completely disregarded the political risks that are starting to brew back to the surface. So something certainly to watch for, but certainly not pricing out the central bank backstop just yet.
How vulnerable does that leave the BTP market, though, in the long term? If people are buying in now, they're holding duration for really quite a long time. Obviously, they can trade in and trade out. This is a very liquid market. But at some point, there are going to be hints. It's probably not going to be this year. It may be next year that the ECB is going to start withdrawing stimulus.
And I think that's a picture for kind of broader markets in general. Is just how central banks are going to withdraw this exceptional monetary support, because really markets are predicated on that really perma easing continuing. So when we look particularly in Italy, the fact that Italian debt to GDP is near the highest across the region. It's expected to touch 167% according to the IMF this year, and they're expected to have even wider deficits going forward as austerity is really being put on the back burner. So yes, eventually investors will have to shift their focus to those long-term challenges and just getting the country back on a path to debt sustainability, which at this point, that path remains unclear. The ECB eventually will have to kind of manage those market expectations.
So all those risks are still there in the background. And at the moment, the market doesn't believe that Mr. Conte's government is going to fall, that we'll be heading for early elections. Were that eventuality, though, to pass, how do you think BTPs would react?
Well, certainly, I think you're correct in saying that, the snap election is not the market base case at this stage. So I think the reason for that is that many coalition lawmakers are positioned to lose their seats should that actually materialize. So while it's unclear what the outcome could be, more importantly from the Senate vote tomorrow, and that could weaken the governing coalition, ultimately, I don't think at this point that a snap election is likely. Certainly, though, that would pressure the ECB on Thursday if we do see, these political risks flare up and their capacity to, for pandemic bond purchases. It's unlikely they're going to expand that program again after they did it at their last meeting, but certainly we could see them shift gears and front run those purchases just in an attempt to kind of assuage any fears and keep those spreads contained across the periphery.
Laura, thanks very much indeed for the update, the setup. Laura Cooper, Bloomberg's Laura Cooper, joining us on what is happening in the BTP market with this political turbulence now becoming once again a reality. We used to be so used to it. Peter Shafrick, RBC Capital Markets Global Macro Strategist, joining us now to give his take. Peter, what do you make of what is happening in Rome right now? Is it okay just to keep buying BTPs? Because come Thursday, we know that Christine Lagarde is still going to be there, the PEP program is still going to be there, and it's still going to be there in size for quite some time to come.
So first of all, I don't necessarily want to disagree too strongly with what Laura just said, because clearly what the ECB does is extremely important, and it's you know, we know how the market would look like if the ECB wasn't there altogether. However, I think there's another element in my mind that has come to the fore, at least over the last 1.5 to 2 years, which is right to the core of this political stability or instability. You now have a government in place that has been very committed to the EU, to the euro. You now have a fiscal program sponsored by the EU in place that will not predominantly, but by a large extent, support Italy. And it was always presumed in the market that these two factors together would also change the political fate in Rome, probably not for good, but at least for the medium term. So in other words, if there's European money pouring in, there's less incentive in voting for Eurosceptic parties. Now, and I think this, in my mind, is the big question for the BTP market, because rightly so, if the market doesn't assume currently that there's going to be fresh election for all the reasons that Laura pointed out. But if you look at the polls and how they would shape up currently, there is a strong possibility that the far right guys or the further right guys, that they would come in and they probably take a different stance. So in my mind, this is the crucial question: is can Italy stay that pro-European course, take the European money and spend it and boost the economy? And maybe last but not least, keep in mind that the main reason why the coalition currently is on the ropes is because not necessarily of fundamental difference how to govern Italy, but about how to spend money that comes in from Europe. So that's an indication of this new political instability, if you ask me.
Peter, is the market being overly optimistic on Italy's capacity to be able to absorb those funds? In the past, the bureaucracy, the corruption has got in the way, and Italy has not been able to generate a big benefit in the way that others have from things like special funds coming out of Brussels. If it doesn't deliver, if it doesn't turn out that Italy can spend this money effectively, debt levels are going to be potentially even higher further down the road, and that's going to only exacerbate the situation. Is the market, again, being too optimistic about Italy's capacity?
But first of all, I think you just said it in your sentence. In my mind, it's not a question about whether Italy can spend the money, but whether it can spend it effectively. And what I mean with that is, I'm pretty sure that if you hand over those roughly 200 billion to be spent over the next 4 years, there will be places that this money will be going to, and in a good part, it will even help growth in the here and now. So I'm absolutely certain that over the time period that this money is there and will be spent, you will see a lift to GDP. So in the near term, that's a positive. The question mark in my mind is about the effectively. Can you spend it in a way? So one of the perennial problems for Italy has been extremely low trend GDP growth. And that was as a consequence was a lack of investment, particularly in trend growth raising projects. So can you find these investments that change the medium-term trajectory of the Italian economy? That, in my mind, is a much broader question.
Peter, we saw the CDU election over the weekend. Armin Laschet is going to be the successor to Angela Merkel. Whether or not he ultimately becomes chancellor, we will wait and see. Or even if he is the union's representative candidate to become chancellor, we will wait and see. But does his succession to the head of the CDU, is that Euro positive? Is that good for Europe?
I mean, currently I think so, because at the end of the day, he's seen as, and I think rightly so, as the continuity candidate. I mean, he is a relatively moderate center guy, just like Merkel is. When you look at the polls in Germany, I mean, obviously the elections are coming up at the end of in autumn. When you look at the polls, one of the very strong possibilities is that you get a CDU plus Green coalition, and if that's the outcome, you want to have a moderate person there. So I think that is a succession candidate, and so far Merkel has been, we have to say, relatively good to Germany, and if the market sort of sees it as a continuation, I would think that's good for Germany, and typically what's good for Germany tends to be, at least for markets, good for Europe as well.
Let's finally wrap up our conversation about Europe by focusing on the ECB. The ECB is going to be meeting Thursday. We'll hear from Christine Lagarde. A couple of days back, she talked about the current ECB staff projections being realistic. I don't think we get new ones until March the 11th. Do you think the ECB is being overly optimistic given the increasing virus counts and increasing lockdowns that we're seeing across the continent?
I do think so. I can make no bones about this, because when you think about it, in the previous projections, the assumption was that there is a gradual reopening, certainly not an intensification of lockdown measures, as is currently likely, as in fact is happening. And then when you sort of look at the strain over here in the UK, we are fairly certain that it's almost a certainty that it's already on the continent. And when you sort of put that into the equation, then I think it's just almost a given that almost every country in the EU and the Euro area will be in a fairly harsh form of lockdown, probably until Easter. And that's not in the ECB's forecasts. Now, does that change the trajectory for the years further out? Now, that's a different story, because also we think that even if we come from a lower base in Q1, the recovery story that we've been painting is still intact. A global cyclical upswing is good for Europe, where reopening the economies has worked relatively well in last summer. Why should it be different this time around? We've got the vaccination and so on and so on. That story hasn't changed. It's just the base that we come from is just so much deeper. So I do think they will have to change them, but I don't think that what she is probably referring to is the medium-term forecast. Whether they have to come down, particularly if they have to come down significantly, that's questionable.
Peter, stick around. We still need to talk about what is happening stateside. We're going to get Yellen tomorrow. We'll focus on that. Peter Shafrick, RBC Capital Markets global macro strategist. He's going to stay with us. A little bit of breaking news staying in Germany. ThyssenKrupp, the steel giant, considering listing its steel division on the stock market. This amid mounting opposition to a potential sale to Liberty Steel Group. This is according to people familiar with the matter. Stock's picking up a little bit. 9.84 is where we're trading right now. 9.85, we'll call it. We'll round it up. Still to come even. Washington, D.C., very much on high alert. We're going to gauge tensions in the U.S. Capitol ahead of Joe Biden's inauguration. We're going to be speaking with American Action Forum President Doug Holtz-Eakin. That's coming up. This is Bloomberg.
Market that over the past few weeks has made it clear it wants to go higher. It got a little spooked by the idea that geopolitical tensions are rising.
Mercedes-Benz is on a path towards CO2 neutral mobility. So we have flicked the switch there, and really we're going to step by step electrify everything. And what does that mean? Combustion engines get electrified.
From London, I'm Guy Johnson. This is Bloomberg Markets. Let's talk about what is going to be happening stateside tomorrow. Bets against the dollar rising ahead of Janet Yellen's expected endorsement of a market-driven exchange rates. The US Treasury Secretary designate testifying before the Senate Tuesday. She's fueling speculation that basically officials won't subject to a softer currency. Back with us now, Peter Shafrick of RBC Capital Markets. Peter, what do you expect to hear from Janet Yellen tomorrow?
Well, I mean, first of all, we're probably going to hear something about the stimulus package, maybe a little bit more detail. And certainly, as you just raised the question about whether or not the US would continue to support a strong dollar policy, or at least stand against an outspoken policy of a weaker dollar. And I think that's almost a given in my mind, and that she will not say outright that the US is interested in a weaker dollar. So, and when you sort of take a look at the reaction most recently, typically speaking, when the market whiffs or gets a whiff that the US economy gets a boost, that there is more growth coming, that particularly the unemployment is coming down, and when you also then see particularly longer dated yields rising again, that typically tends to support the dollar. So I'm not really that worried about anything that she says is going to lead to a significant dollar collapse.
The dollar's already come down a little bit, and the market is certainly betting that there is further to come. If you take a look at the CFTC data, that suggests that at least hedge funds are pretty short still of the dollar. Why do you think that they are seeing something that you are not? What could undermine your idea that actually the dollar is reasonably stable from here?
Well, I mean, first of all, you just mentioned it. It's one of the it's probably one of the most consensus trades out there that the dollar is going to weaken, and we stand against that also from a positioning point of view. But then again, when you look at the growth trajectory going forward, as implied in, for instance, analysts' forecasts and consensus forecasts, I mean, the US still does quite well, particularly also against Europe, which is obviously one of the big part of the dollar index, for instance. And then again, when you look at sort of the interest rate differential, I mean, it has been widening lately, and particularly if you look at sort of the expectations for future inflation, it has been going up stateside, and that typically is also an endorsement by the market that sort of the adopted policies of reinflating the economy to some degree is working. And as long as sort of this narrative is around, whether or not ultimately that's going to bear out is a different story. But as long as that narrative around that the US is going to do well, it's going to reduce unemployment, it's going to get sort of wages up and therefore inflation back to target much, much quicker than other parts of the world can do this. As long as that's the case, it's very difficult to see sort of a significantly weaker dollar in my mind.
Peter, you mentioned that Yellen's going to talk about what is happening with the Biden relief package. 1.9 goes into Congress. How much do you think comes out?
That's very difficult to say. I mean, because when you keep in mind, is obviously not all of that is sort of pure stimulus. There's sort of other pet projects in there as well. And we'll have to see whether in the negotiations, some of that will have to come out. But ultimately, when you look at it, I mean, it's the first significant initiative that the Democrats want to push through. They have the majority, even a very, very slim one now in both chambers, and sort of wiggling that down significantly. Well, I mean, it's difficult to sort of see that at this stage. So it probably will come down, but maybe not too much.
Peter, final question. The rollout of the vaccine program, both here in Europe and in the United States, is turning out to be much slower than the market has anticipated. There are exceptions. The UK is pushing ahead. Israel has been highly effective. But elsewhere, certainly the large-scale programs are struggling. How do you think that is going to manifest itself in the data? You've already addressed the fact that it looks like Europe is going to be in lockdown until Easter. Do you think ultimately we may see the same thing in the United States?
Well, I mean, the United States is slightly different, also because the weather pattern are much more differentiated across the regions, across the various states. But you have seen already that those states that are fairly heavily impacted have been put in place tighter restrictions. So, I wouldn't go as broad brushed as the case here in Europe, but overall the story is very similar. And again, I think, it's very likely in my mind that the new strain, the new UK strain, in fact, maybe some of the other new strains as well, is already out there and is probably going to spread fairly quickly. And then when you look at it, you have a situation where, on the one hand, you have new strains that are probably more transmissible, and we know that in some places, such as the UK or also the US, some of the track and trace systems or some of the other alternative measures have not been very effective, and therefore the numbers have been quite high. And then when you look at that, what else can you do, really? The production capacity for the vaccines currently has to catch up. So I do think the US is probably going to face very similar problems.
Peter, great to get your take today. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Peter Shafrick of RBC Capital Markets. Thank you. Okay, still ahead, former UK Prime Minister Tony Blair sees a return to multilateralism under Joe Biden's presidency. Our exclusive conversation with him next. This is Bloomberg. Matt Miller caught up with former UK Prime Minister Tony Blair a little earlier to talk about vaccine passports. Let's take a listen.
One of the things that the American administration will be really keen to show is that multilateralism is back in fashion, and they're going to be working with European countries, with the UK, with other partners, in order to show that American leadership is back at that multilateral level.
I want to ask you what you would do were you in Joe Biden's position, and perhaps the British need a little bit of this as well. We have an extremely divisive or divided society in America, especially at a time when we're making this transition to power. President Donald Trump is the first living president in, I'm sure, over 100 years who has refused to go to the inauguration of his successor. What would you do if you were in Joe Biden's place in order to try and bring the country back together?
Well, there are two things. And the first thing he is clearly doing, which is using language of reconciliation, of reaching out, and it's in his nature. I mean, I've known Joe Biden for a long period of time. He's someone who, has genuinely got a good heart, good values. He can see the divisions of America, and he's made it his job as president, this is why he's in a way the right man in the right place at the right time to try and bring the country together. But the second thing, because this is not an American-specific problem, it's all over the world, it's to focus on delivery. And you've got an immediate focus with the pandemic. And the best way to overcome some of the divisions within society is to show that you're delivering for the people.
It strikes me that the best way for the economy would be to say, look, if you've had the vaccine, we'll find a way of denoting that, and then you can go to a restaurant or you can fly on a plane. But that might not be the best way for society.
Well, I'm sure that you're going to get to some form of health status passport. In my view, it's inevitable because you're just not going to be able to get the economy, certainly in an international sense, going again unless you have that. But I think we've got to realize what the problem is that policymakers are facing. And it's really come about as a result of events of the last few weeks when these new strains have arisen that are posing new challenges and are highly transmissible. And the problem is for most policymakers around the world, they could see, months back, they could see 3 phases to this pandemic. The first phase is you lock down and you get the disease under control. The second phase is that you've got the disease under control, you've got restrictions, but you've got test and trace, and you're waiting for the vaccine. And then the third phase is vaccination, and people thought of vaccination as something you could do over a period of time, not at leisure, but at a moderate speed. What's happened is that second phase has collapsed under the pressure of recent spikes in infection. And really what you're faced with now, if you're a policymaker, is pretty much mass lockdown or mass vaccination. And what it's doing is it's putting enormous pressure on supply chains around the world because those supply chains have not been geared up to accelerate in the way that governments now want. So I think what you're going to find, in fact, what you are finding, is a desperate scramble for vaccine and for governments to realize that until you get a substantial part of the population vaccinated,
It's extremely exciting for the university, for being a historically black college and university. It's just exciting for our engineers to actually be allowed to work for a large firm such as Boeing with such technologies that we can see the outcome.
Their CPG history, their experience, and
and really how we might be able to combine together to really create this fantastic public company. And so we kind of got into the SPAC thing a little bit before it became such a hot method of going public.
Give you a sense of the real-time action, the 10-year yield tumbling now 11 basis points, so continuing in this knee-jerk risk-off feel.
From London, I'm Guy Johnson. This is Bloomberg Markets. Let's talk politics now. Joe Biden will become president of the United States on Wednesday at noon. Thousands of National Guard troops have been deployed to Washington, D.C., as we've all seen ahead of that inauguration. The city now on high alert, with authorities receiving multiple reports of violent threats at the level of the incidents that happened on the U.S. Capitol this month. Joining us now with the latest Bloomberg News U.S. politics reporter, Kathleen Hunter. What are we expecting Wednesday? Just sort of set the scene for us in terms of how the authorities are going to manage the inauguration.
Well, I'm reminded, Guy, of, 4 years ago when Trump, straight out of the gate, one of the first, issues that he had with news reporting of his presidency was his claim that, his crowd size far surpassed President Obama's. That turned out, to not be the case, but certainly it's going to be quite different this time around for Joe Biden's inaugural. There's going to be, in fact, a number of American flags set up on the National Mall. Usually the National Mall is covered with members of the general public who get tickets fairly easily and are able to congregate, in some cases stretching, all the way from the Capitol down the mall, down to the Lincoln Memorial. All of that area is going to be closed off this time around for security reasons. And we're going to have a number of American flags set out instead. But it's going to be quite a different scene, a much more, tamped down ceremony, far fewer people. President Trump himself won't be in attendance. So it's going to be quite a different situation from what we've seen in the past.
What kind of detail are we expecting from the speech that he will deliver?
Well, I think we're likely to hear, we do have some preview of we did get a preview of what Biden is expected to say, and it sounds like he's going to be talking about many of the themes we heard him hammer on during his campaign, and certainly then again on January 6th, following that really unprecedented mob attack on the U.S. Capitol. The president-elect is going to be talking about the need to unify the country, the need to move past and heal the divisions of the Trump era. Those divisions have obviously been very much on display and will actually be serving, symbolically as a backdrop to his swearing in. And so I think that it's going to be a marked shift in tone and really building on what he talked about when he was giving his stump speeches, but now it's going to be his chance to begin putting that into practice.
Kathleen, we understand that at Joint Base Andrews that morning, 8 a.m., I understand is the time, there will be a ceremony to mark the departure of Donald Trump as president. How concerned are people about that? What is he expected to say? Do you think he will be mindful of what is happening across town that day? Do you think he will be mindful of the risks that he is running if he were to say anything inflammatory?
I think if history is any guide, there's not necessarily a reason to think that Donald Trump would temper his rhetoric at this stage, 48 hours from now or whatever, when we haven't seen him do that necessarily up until now. I think, most of why we haven't heard from him, I would imagine, over the last several days is because he's now been banned for more than a week from, Twitter and Facebook. So that's taken away one of his big megaphones. I think that that's, as you suggest, something that people are watching very closely because, what the president says as he gets on the plane to depart Washington for the final time might have certainly a bearing on how his supporters, even his most extreme supporters, conduct themselves, during the day of and the days after the inauguration. So I think that it'll be very telling to see what he does or doesn't say, but I think there's not necessarily a reason to think that he wouldn't speak out in ways we've heard him speak out before.
Final quick question, and back to the Biden team. Given the concerns that were voiced only a few weeks back about the Biden team's ability to transition into power effectively, is this team going to be hitting the ground running?
Well, I think there's a lot of concern about that. I think Biden's team the transition team is trying to do everything they can to assure that that happens. That being said, they started out for a number of reasons. They're starting out, behind where we saw President Obama and also President Trump start out on their first day in office, because President Trump and his Republican supporters in Congress disputed for so long the results of the election. The vetting process for his cabinet secretaries and other top-level nominees hasn't gone forward to the same degree that it normally does. That means he's going to have acting heads of federal agencies most likely in place for at least some period of time after he takes office. President Trump and President Obama, by contrast, had many of their top nominees confirmed that day that they were inaugurated on January 20th. That's likely not to be the case for Biden. So that's going to put him a little bit behind the 8 ball. The country's still obviously dealing with the results of the coronavirus pandemic. There are now these new security concerns across the country and in Washington. So there's a lot of issues on his plate, and I think the degree to which the new president, the incoming president, is able to turn the page and move past them is going to be something everyone in Washington and across the country is going to be watching very closely in the coming days.
Yep. A global audience. Kathleen, thank you very much indeed. Bloomberg's Kathleen Hunter updating us ahead of the inauguration later this week. Joining us now with more insights, Doug Holtz-Eakin, American Action Forum President and former Director of the Congressional Budget Office. Thanks for your time today. Really appreciate it. Let's focus on the financials. We now know that the new administration is asking for circa 1.9 trillion in terms of a new relief package. Now, some of that obviously has already gone out of the door, but nevertheless, we're going to hear from Janet Yellen tomorrow. We're going to start to see this process unfold over the next few days. In terms of what the new administration wants and what the new administration is going to get, how big a gap do you think we're going to see?
I think there'll be a considerable gap, and it's because the Biden administration has decided to attempt to pass this through Congress using regular order, which would require 60 votes in the Senate, which means they're going to have to go get at least 9 Republicans. And that means the package will look different. So this is an opening bid to a legislative process. I expect, Treasury Secretary Yellen to make a strong case for it. But there's some things in there that I just don't think have a chance to get through. They're not going to raise the minimum wage to $15 in the middle of a recession and damage small businesses, for example. And I think they are going to have to think hard about the scale of this proposal. If you look at the data, GDP in the fourth quarter of 2020 was about $150, maybe $100 billion below 2019. Why do you need a $1.9 trillion solution to that size of a problem? So they're going to have a really hard sell job to get something like this through.
Just out of curiosity, you mentioned they're not using the reconciliation program. Why do you think they are not doing that? And what does that tell us about potentially what could be coming down the pike from the Biden administration in a couple of months' time?
I think they're holding on to the option of using reconciliation for other parts of the domestic agenda, which, quite frankly, will be more contentious. There is an agreement that we have an enormous problem with the coronavirus. There's an agreement that the economy has needed some support. There's just disagreement on the scale of those things. When he moves forward to his clean energy agenda, health agenda, those kinds of items, he's going to need to really rely on just Democratic votes, most likely. And they'll hold on to reconciliation for those items.
Taxation?
Taxation can be done in reconciliation. As I understand the plans, they're going to, propose some fairly dramatic things on energy, health, and infrastructure, and they will use some of the tax proposals from the campaign, notably higher rates on affluent individuals and corporations, to offset at least some of that cost.
You talked about there being a recognition on both sides of the aisle of the fact that the American economy does need some help. It's just a question of scale of how much. The vaccine rollout looks like it's happening a little bit more slowly than anticipated. Does that increase, therefore, the view on both sides of the aisle in terms of the scale of what is needed?
Well, we just passed $900 billion out of the Congress. That's about 4% of GDP, expected to go out into the economy in the first half of 2021. So that's 8% at an annual rate. That's an enormous amount of support. So I expect both sides to be looking at the vaccine rollout. If it looks like it's ramping up and looks anything like 100 million vaccinations in the first 100 days, then it's really hard to make the case for extending UI for another 6 months. You might want to do it till July. It's really hard to make the case for raising the the benefit that goes with that unemployment insurance, one would expect if the vaccine works well, that you will have the economy functioning much better by July, August, September. If it doesn't, then more support is needed for a longer period of time, and that changes the math.
Okay. So again, we need to track the data, watch the vaccines, see how they're being rolled out and how effectively that program is going. Just kind of looking forward and thinking about where the US economy is going next. It is going to need support. It is going to need a great deal of work from Congress to get it back to where it was. What do you think the model is now? How do you think bipartisanship is going to work in a Senate that is basically 50-50? What's the model? As you look back to history, is there anything that you would say worked well and this administration can use?
So the first thing I would say is that the economy is not as bad as many people depict it. For example, despite the job loss in December, that came with 500,000 jobs lost in leisure and hospitality. That's a direct result of the surge in virus cases. Outside of that, we continue to have job growth. No one expects fourth quarter GDP to come in with a negative number. It's going to grow somewhere between 2 and 6% probably. And with the support that was just put in place, first quarter is going to be reasonably strong. So that means you don't need these enormous packages necessarily to just keep the economy growing. And the model then is to have things that you can get through Congress. The best way to do that is for the administration to write legislation, to take the pen and say, this is what we want, to tell the American people that's what they want, send it to Congress. And at that point, Congress can begin to modify it as needed to get it through the House and the Senate, knowing that the White House ultimately will keep in the things the minority needs to have them cooperate, protect the flank of their party when they have to take unpleasant votes. And in the end, to get bipartisan legislation in Congress, the effort starts in the White House. It's the only place that can broker compromise. It's the only place that can provide political air cover for both sides to do difficult things. And so how the Biden administration approaches this is very important.
How are the Republicans positioned, the centrist Republican positioned, when it comes to the energy transformation? This is going to be a key and central plank of the incoming administration's program. And I'm wondering kind of where there is ground for movements in terms of a bipartisanship agenda that can deliver some of it and how effective that is going to be.
The House Republicans, for example, had as a common part of their reelection plank the notion that climate change was a real problem, that it had substantial impacts on the globe, and that the problem needed to be dealt with. The step they hadn't taken was to write down large-scale solutions of the type that the Biden administration is going to propose. So the gap that needs to get closed is the gap between recognition and measurement of the problem and addressing it on a large scale. I think if the Biden administration comes forward with some fairly efficient policies that have minimal economic disruption as they get ramped up, they'll get cooperation. If they come in with something that looks to be a bridge too far in terms of negative impact on the economy, I think they'll start to have some trouble. And so I'm quite interested to see how they do this, because they have finally gotten to a point where they've got both parties on the "we have a problem" page. Now we have to get them on the same solution page.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering about. It's interesting, the reports coming out of DC today suggesting one of the first things that President Biden would do would be to finally kill off the Keystone Pipeline. And I just wonder how that's going to set the tone going forward. Doug, we've got to leave it there. Thanks very much indeed for your time today. Greatly appreciated. Doug Holtz-Eakin, American Action Forum President. What have we got coming up for you? Plenty more in this program. We're going to be talking what is happening with the Janet Yellen hearing. That is certainly something that we're going to be focusing on. We're also going to discuss the impact of the China, the outgoing Trump administration's action on China. That's coming up with George Magnus of Oxford University. That's next. This is Bloomberg.
China continues to be, recovering well. And with the opening up that was decided at the last 5-year plan, that is a golden opportunity for many international banks.
So we'll look to double our footprint across IB and also wealth management and asset management in the 3 to 5 year time frame.
Growth outlook structurally is very strong, but it does need to consolidate and allow time to help the share price appreciation to move more in sync with the growth.
So China can avoid further decoupling if they stop these inappropriate actions.
But at the moment, we really want to see the dust settle first on international relationships, on China's role in the global economy.
I don't see a likelihood of a big change in the policy with the change of administrations.
Bloomberg has enhanced search on the terminal to deliver what you need when you need it. Now, you can simply type phrases in everyday English in the command line. Compare financials, find people, analyze markets. You can enter phrases or ask questions. What do you want to know today? Ask a question or visit SearchGo to find answers now.
From London, I'm Guy Johnson. This is Bloomberg Markets. Let's talk about what is happening in China. The economy roaring back to pre-pandemic growth rates in the fourth quarter as the country's industrial engines firing up once again. Surging demand for exports really the driver. When it comes to the consumer, less good. Joining us now to discuss all of this is George Magnus, Oxford University China Centre Research Fellow. George, nice to see you. Thank you very much, or not to see you, nice to talk to you. Let's talk a little bit about what is happening here. It'd be nice to meet in person, but we can't do that quite yet. China is coming back. The data are really strong. How does this change the priorities of the administration in Beijing as they go into 2021?
Well, the main event from an economic policy point of view in 2021 really is the release of details of the 14th five-year plan, which will happen in March around the time of the National People's Congress. And I think, as a lot of people already know, if they kind of follow the Chinese economy, Xi Jinping has already announced that the motif really in China's economy in terms of policy is going to be what he calls dual circulation strategy. Okay, so this is really an emphasis on domestic economic circulation, supply chains, production, consumption, as well as international. Now, the GDP data, which you referred to just now, of course, were remarkable in a number of different ways. One of them was because domestic circulation really fell off the back of a lorry, in effect, and actually most of the sort of the growth in China last year, really was through the trade balance and through investment by local governments into infrastructure, which they're trying to wean themselves away from. So the big event for 2021 will be whether the government is capable and able really to reverse that shift, so to make domestic consumption, domestic production count really in a way that it didn't during the pandemic.
So how do they do that? Retail sales growth slowing to 4.6 in December. That's down from 5% in November. Year on year for the whole of 2020, down by 3.9%. It's a tale of two cities completely when it comes to these two sides, as you suggest. How do you shift stimulus from the industrial sector, the export sector, to that local, more domestic sector? How does that actually happen, and can it happen quickly enough to generate a reasonably rapid turnaround for that retail sales number and for that domestic economy?
Yeah, I think that's going to be a key question. Now, I actually think there's going to be, I don't think, in one sense, I don't think the government has to do very much to basically see a partial reversal of that slump really in retail sales during the first months of 2021. Okay, so I think we're going to see a little bit of that anyway, because even though the 2020 annual data for consumption were very poor. In fact, it took the consumption share of GDP back to where it was about 10 years ago. So they need to really come back from that. And some of that, I think, will happen in the early part of this year for mathematical reasons, if nothing else. But how do you make it happen is a question, and that's what we really want to see the government kind of tell us, if they do, which is really about how they're going to strengthen income. That's really the problem. Chinese consumers are really on the rack, only partly because of the pandemic and because of what was a fear of congregating and mingling in public, but mainly because income growth has been so low and because income inequality has grown even further in 2020, as it has elsewhere, because of the pandemic, but not only, but it's a trend that's been going on. So short answer is we need to see more action on privatization of resources, giving the private sector more more emphasis, because as we know, most of it is on the state sector at the moment, income growth, and getting social security payments up so that Chinese workers don't have to save so much.
George, China's share of the world economy is accelerating at its fastest level ever. And Nomura, I think he was saying that China's growth could surpass the US as the largest economy by 2028. That's not very far away. Today, we've seen the Trump administration on its way out, basically tightening the supply chain noose around Huawei, revoking supply licenses. How do you think the Biden administration is going to change the current US approach to China, if at all?
Well, we'll soon see. Certainly the appointments that Biden has made or recommended to key positions for Asia and China are very encouraging. These are experienced people. They know the region very well. I think this is sort of a two-pronged thing, really, or at least two-pronged. One is, of course, America can meet the China challenge much more effectively if it turns inward a little bit by paying attention to science and innovation and engineering and doing a lot of the things at home which it needs to make the economy and to make its potential and its contribution in terms of science and innovation that much more robust. The other thing, of course, is really how it manages its relations with China. I don't expect the Biden administration to do very much with tariffs early on, but I certainly don't expect the tariff preoccupation which the Trump administration had and stupidly had, really, because they can't really affect the trade balances by tariffs. It's just a cost that both Chinese and American consumers will bear. So the restraint over access to technology, though, and to inputs and to core resources that China needs to basically fulfill its own technological ambition, I think that will remain in situ. And I think that my guess is that the Biden administration will play pretty tough on that.
Always a pleasure. George, thank you very much indeed. George Magnus, Oxford University China Research Centre Associate. This is Bloomberg.
Access the financial world on demand. Hear from leading economists, policymakers, and industry experts via live and on-demand webinars, only from Bloomberg. Start exploring to see what's moving the markets. Visit Bloomberg Bloomberg.com webinars.
From London, I'm Guy Johnson. This is Bloomberg Markets. Let's get you up to speed with what you need to know. Here is a Bloomberg Business Flash to look at some of the biggest business stories in the news right now. Let's start off in the supermarket sector. Shares in Carrefour falling today. That's after Canada's Couche-Tard abandoned talks for a $20 billion takeover of the French grocer. France's finance minister publicly opposing the deal. The government may have been concerned about the potential impact on Carrefour's employees and its supply chain. The boss of French messaging service Parler has gone into hiding, saying he has received death threats. John Matzer's platform was briefly home to conservative supporters of President Trump, but it's now gone silent after Apple and Google dropped it from their app stores and Amazon pulled its web hosting privileges. And Bloomberg has learned that Citrix Systems is in advanced talks to buy work management platform company Reich. The price more than $2 billion. Reich is owned by the buyout firm Vista Equity Partners, a deal we understand could be reached this week. And that is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Quick look at what we've got coming up for you. The European close is going to follow in a couple of hours' time. We'll be updating you on where we sit in terms of the markets. Today, reasonably quiet, but the action really kicks off later on in the week. Got Janet Yellen testifying tomorrow, and we've obviously got the administration, the new administration being sworn in with President Joe Biden on Wednesday. S&P futures flat, Brent's a little softer, but very quiet markets today. More details to follow. This is Bloomberg.
This is Bloomberg Best, your weekly review of the most important business news, analysis, and interviews from Bloomberg Television around the world.
Ken Burns, welcome to Bloomberg Big Decisions.
We have always been a mixture of things. We are always stronger for that mixture.
Growth is a way to stay competitive, delight more and more consumers.
Are you worried that people won't take the vaccine?
We remain concerned about vaccine hesitancy.
What is one word of advice you'll take with you?
Learn how to listen. And that is certainly something that has served me well.
Ankiti, where do you go from here? It's a huge market. It's a huge opportunity. I want to go 100x from here.
Our philosophy is to partner where we can and stand apart when we should.
Our generation's biggest problem.
Climate change is happening.
And the world's most innovative solutions.
Transport, industry, buildings, electricity, all of those things.
Everything you need to know about our changing environment, the politics of global warming.
We can and we will deal with climate change.
In the fight against climate change, Bloomberg Green has you covered.
This is the 1980s all over again, to make sure that we keep our hands firmly on the driving wheel.
I do not see demand coming back to the pre-COVID level anywhere earlier than the end of 2022.
If that happens and we see a demand recovery, then I think the market can absorb it.
Months after Hurricane Maria, Puerto Rico is still in peril. Huge swaths of the island are still without power, running water, or access to medical care. Experts estimate that it will take years before these services are restored island-wide. Much of the blame has been placed on FEMA for a slow response in comparison to recent disasters on the mainland. But recovery from a disaster of this complexity and scale has proven more challenging than anyone anticipated. And filling the gaps between an overextended public sector and a suffering populace falls on the private citizens. Robert Anderson is a Puerto Rico resident of 4 years.
The eye of the storm came in south of El Yunque, swept up towards San Juan, and out to Arecibo. Everything on the right-hand side is what we call the dirty side of the storm.
This isn't his first time in a disaster zone. With a military and telecom background, Anderson worked on repairing damaged cell phone towers in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina. Some might be tempted to label him a disaster capitalist, seeking lucrative government contracts for his expertise. But as Anderson finds himself in the middle of a humanitarian crisis, he and his associates are developing a variety of pro bono recovery projects that target the island's hardest hit areas.
I see two Puerto Ricos. We're here in San Juan. They have telecommunications restored. They may or may not have power, but basic services are in place. They're able to get food. They're able to buy things. They're surviving. And when you look outside of the San Juan area, you can go 15 minutes from here and find areas that are devastated. I'm working on the devastated side.
Today, he's put together a boots-on-the-ground mission to provide medical care to some of the island's most isolated and vulnerable residents. Steve Berenbaum is one of Anderson's business associates. He offered an extra car and a set of hands.
So we received an initial report from a nurse that was out in the area. We're headed to the northeast region of Utuado for some people that are in need of urgent medical assistance.
Dr. Sally Priester is a physician from San Juan. She filled a van with medical supplies at her own expense and brought along a team of nurses. Google Maps estimated our first destination to be a 90-minute drive. But it didn't account for obstacles like this. Our first stop was the home of an 82-year-old blind Vietnam veteran. His roof was blown off by the storm, and he's been living alone in a back shed for nearly 2 months.
His cane actually got broken in the storm, so he's limited mobility. He has a number of medical ailments. Dr. Priester's having a look into him. We called the VA. They're going to get him set up with what he needs, get him stabilized so he can then be transported either to an evacuation center or off the island. It's when the chain gets broken, when those families that are connected to them leave the island or take off. These guys get left at the end of the road, and it's tough.
FEMA was not officially part of Robert's team, and their arrival caught everyone by surprise. Their job here was to survey and report back to their superiors, and did not come with medical aid of any kind.
People think that FEMA is there to hand out bottles of water. It's not what they do. FEMA has a role to play. They have a very specific role. They bring in ships, they bring in airplanes, they bring in tractor trailers with pallets of things. But they're a big machine, and there's gaps in that thing. And you're seeing one of the gaps here, and we help fill that role. These guys are in a bad situation before, and now they're struggling for real basic things. One of the risks that you run is people going from fear to hopelessness. Those are the folks that we're trying to reach.
And how are they reached? How are they even found?
Word of mouth, mostly.
And what's your role in all this?
Ghost in the machine. I'm lucky enough to be able to communicate with folks in FEMA, the state of Puerto Rico.
For a ghost, Robert makes his presence well known. Not only was he the de facto leader of the mission, now with FEMA in tow, he created his own maps to survey storm damage.
So we're right here.
And delivered them to FEMA HQ free of charge.
I have pretty good reach.
Perhaps that's how he managed to earn himself a coveted FEMA badge without actually working for them. And it's these relationships that allow him to operate more efficiently than an NGO or a government agency.
We're able to resolve problems at a different level.
Our next stop was on a mountaintop, a family of 11 struggling to care for their special needs brother in what was left of their house.
Probably we are the first health team to come and visit this family.
Muy bien, todo muy bien.
The patient has Down syndrome. He is all day in bed. The difficulty with this is the patient cannot be alone. The most important thing is that you need to take care of the chronic disease besides disability, because they have been not going to a doctor, and no doctor has come in here yet.
So we need a refill of this medication.
After maybe 54 days, it's not getting better. And the only way that you can be able to see that is coming to the ground, drive, and see the people and talk to the people.
You can see San Juan from here, but you can't get there. It's like the Emerald City.
On this stop, we caught word that a man living alone at the edge of the jungle was in need of care.
So we decided to take a little detour, come up here and check out and see what's going on. One of the challenges is to find those people that are at the end of these roads that need help.
¿Pero por qué estás solo? ¿Por qué estás por acá tan solo? I'm asking about why he's alone right here. He said things of life happens. I'm here by myself. So ¿dónde vive acá? En la parte de... This is not a job. To do this, you need to have passion for what you can do. You're not going to get paid.
It's said in disaster response and emergency response that the real first responders are your neighbors. You don't need to wait for a lucrative FEMA contract to go out and do good and to help the community.
In the end, do you feel like you're making a difference?
Lives you touch and people that you can affect. I don't really think about it in those terms.
But why do you do it?
It helps me sleep at night. I think it's as much for the people that are going out to help and do things as it is for the people that you affect.
Whether out of altruism, or the lure of a paid gig, or some mixture of the two, Anderson hopes to stay here to help shape Puerto Rico's future.
Puerto Rico's essentially been a colony for 400 years. It was treated poorly by the Spanish. It was not treated well by the United States when they first got here. Puerto Rico can continue in the way that it's always been, or Puerto Rico can rebuild itself like nothing that's ever been. And we have to do everything we can to make that real. That's the bottom line.
When I met him first online, I found him to be really sweet. I think I was the one who was talking for an hour. He was just listening.
When we met, I saw her. She was beautiful, intelligent, and kind, which was, something that I was looking for.
Anshu and Sumit are one of about 12 million couples that get married in India every year. Unlike their parents' generation, they're not from two close villages, but from two cities on opposite sides of the country. And their love didn't start through community matchmaking, marriage brokers, or classified ads in newspapers, but began online.
So we met through jeevansathi.com. So it's basically an online portal where we have detailed profile of different grooms and brides.
It makes a lot of remote profiles who are located in distant areas more accessible.
Thanks to growing internet and smartphone usage, matrimony websites and apps in India are starting to disrupt the matchmaking industry. More and more people are finding their partners at the click of a mouse. Jeevansathi.com, where Anshu and Sumit met, is one of the biggest players. Young Indians looking for love set up profiles including their caste and horoscope, but their criteria for choosing spouses appears to be changing.
We have seen the shift from, traditional caste community conservative parameters to something which is more focused on education, employment.
Anshu and Sumit's marriage was initiated by their parents, but modern Indian couples like them have more input than previous generations.
We looked up to them to agree for the proposal, but it was primarily our decision that we wanted to be with each other.
So what's the emoji you use the most to send to each other?
There's a bear, which basically we use for indicating a hug.
Yeah, that's our language basically. Bear icon for a hug.
Time flies when you're in love, and just 1.5 months after they first met online, the couple got engaged. They decided to hold their wedding less than 3 months later. But planning a traditional Hindu wedding on such short notice is no easy task. The massive event usually lasts 3 days, has various ceremonies and celebrations, and involves the entire two families and hundreds of guests. Luckily, there are websites and apps for that.
We searched online, we got in touch with Wedding Brigade, and they helped us finalize the venue. And it makes the search faster and efficient.
Startups like the Wedding Brigade are challenging traditional wedding planners in this $50 billion industry. It provides various services from booking banquet venues to buying wedding gowns. The website makes money by charging commission from vendors.
People don't want to be limited to what is available around them. They want to know the entire range of options available before making a decision. And now it's easy to find almost everything on one portal.
Anshu and Sumit are officially married in a ritual that has gone on for thousands of years, but their love started in a very new way. Technologies might be changing the way couples meet, date, and get married in India, but they're definitely not changing everything.
The technology was only the first level help that we could get to find each other. Everything else was like very humanly and emotions and feelings based.
Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren has become a symbol of everything the Republican Party stands against.
Everyone gets a right to basic health care. We need strong oversight of these banks.
A legal scholar and a consumer advocate turned politician, Warren has branded herself as a champion of the working class and made a career out of standing up to big business. While rumors of a 2020 presidency bid remain just that,
I'm not running for president.
Her Senate seat is up for re-election in 2018, and Republicans are already pumping millions into super PACs to defeat her. This is the story of how a law professor and politician came to be seen as the biggest threat to Republican values and the greatest hope for progressive America. Elizabeth Warren was born Elizabeth Ann Herron, the youngest of 3 siblings, on June 22, 1949 in Oklahoma City to middle-class parents. After waiting tables to help her family pay the bills, Warren became a star on the high school debate team. She landed a scholarship to George Washington University at the age of 16, but 2 years later dropped out to marry her high school sweetheart, Jim Warren. By 1980, Warren was a mother of 2, divorced and remarried, had earned a bachelor's degree from the University of Houston, a juris degree from Rutgers, and practicing law in New Jersey. Warren then went on to become an influential law professor, teaching, lecturing, and publishing highly cited work on bankruptcy and commercial law at 7 universities around the country, eventually settling at Harvard Law School. But Warren wasn't always a liberal lion.
Elizabeth Warren used to be a Republican, actually.
That's Stephen Dennis.
I'm a Senate reporter for Bloomberg. Around the time that Elizabeth Warren switched parties, she became a fierce opponent of a Republican drive to make it much harder to file for bankruptcy. She fought that for a decade. It ended up passing anyways.
While her efforts ultimately failed, her warning calls were heard in 2008.
We're in the midst of a serious financial crisis. Our entire economy is in danger, and without immediate action by Congress, America could slip into a financial panic, and a distressing scenario would unfold.
Professor Warren was tapped to help with oversight in the government bailout.
She would excoriate bankers and their bonuses and their practices.
Why should the U.S. taxpayer alone carry Citi?
She proposed a series of tough regulations, which became the basis for much of the Dodd-Frank financial law that we have today. That sort of catapulted her to national stardom, particularly among the progressive left.
Encouraged by her newfound notoriety, Warren declared her bid for the U.S. Senate on September 14, 2011. During the race, her opponent Scott Brown tried to derail Warren by accusing her of falsely claiming Native American heritage, a controversy that earned her the nickname Pocahontas. Nevertheless, she was victorious and won the Senate seat by a comfortable margin. She used her new tenure to challenge everyone, from banking regulators and Treasury officials to members of Wall Street and Congress.
I'm really concerned that too big to fail has become too big for trial. We need tough new laws to hold corporate executives personally accountable. No one should be above the law.
She called for Wells Fargo CEO John Stump to resign for fraud, introduced the Bank on Student Loans Fairness Act, and reintroduced the 21st Century Glass-Steagall Act. In 2016, after staying silent during the Democratic primary battle, Warren finally endorsed Hillary Clinton and had some harsh words for candidate Trump.
Donald Trump is a loud, nasty, thin-skinned fraud who has never risked anything for anyone, and that is just one of the many reasons he will never be president of the United States.
But she was wrong.
The forgotten men and women of our country will be forgotten no longer.
Warren wasted no time resisting Trump's agenda.
Have you ever managed or overseen a $1 trillion loan program?
I have not.
How about a $1 billion loan program?
I have not.
In the Donald Trump era, Elizabeth Warren has been playing defense and trying to prevent Donald Trump and his cabinet appointees from rolling back protections that she helped enact.
Warren actually found herself rebuked by Mitch McConnell for reading a letter by Coretta Scott King about Jeff Sessions' record on racism during his confirmation.
She was warned. She was given an explanation. Nevertheless, she persisted.
That moment became something that's on T-shirts, bumper stickers, slogans, and that really galvanized a lot of support for her. It's been very hard for Republicans to get much of anything done this year, and that's at least in part to this resistance movement that Elizabeth Warren has helped champion.
We are here to fight back.
Enough of Elizabeth Warren. Like you,
millions of dollars are being funneled to defeat Warren in the midterm elections in 2018. But it's the rumors of a 2020 presidential bid that has further prompted powerful donors to fund her opposition, often using the same playbook of constant and ruthless ad campaigns that many believe helped Trump win in 2016. It's anyone's guess if she will endure what Hillary could not.
You know, the question for Elizabeth Warren is whether she can go from being a liberal firebrand to somebody who can regularly get 60 votes for initiatives in the Senate and 218 in the House and drive an agenda, and whether she can bring together coalitions for political victories. That's the challenge, and we'll see what happens.
Sadiq Khan, the mayor of London, has made some powerful opponents.
He doesn't know me, never met me, doesn't know what I'm all about. I think they're very rude statements, and frankly, tell him I will remember those statements.
My message to Donald Trump and his team is that, your views of Islam are ignorant.
He's the first Muslim mayor of a major Western capital and proud of it. This is how Sadiq Khan went from the son of Pakistani immigrants to a lawyer, lawmaker, and now the mayor of London. Khan's parents emigrated from Pakistan. His father was a bus driver, his mother a stay-at-home seamstress. The 10-strong Khan family squeezed into a 3-bedroom flat in South London. He wanted to be a dentist, but TV in the 1980s convinced him otherwise.
Objection!
LA law with its swagger and ill-fitting suits caught Khan's eye. He graduated in 1991 with a degree in law from North London University and joined a human rights firm. Khan worked a number of high-profile cases, often clashing with London's Metropolitan Police Force. But he had bigger political ambitions.
This is what being a new MP is like, squatting on a bench in the absence of an office, dealing with letters from constituents.
Reports are just coming in of an explosion here in London.
And there's just explosions, and then it was just smoke everywhere.
Everyone's just asking what's happened.
Only 2 months after Khan entered the Commons as a Member of Parliament, London was attacked by Islamist extremists.
That day will stay with me for the rest of my life.
He spoke out against the attacks both as a London MP and as a Muslim.
He has been very clear about his opposition to violence, opposition to terrorism, and has set out to make the case for a more open and peaceful Islam.
That's Thomas Penny, one of Bloomberg's Westminster correspondents.
Here is a man who is a Muslim, and he is standing up and being open and straightforward and being clear that the problem here is not Islam, but it's Islamic extremism.
In 2015, a decade after the attacks, Khan ran for mayor of London, and his faith was back in the headlines. His opponent, Zach Goldsmith, trying to link Khan to radical Islam.
The debate got again personal and nasty. The Goldsmith camp has called Khan extreme and accused him of associating with, quote, those who seek to do our police and capital harm.
It's a pattern of behaviour.
Even the former Prime Minister David Cameron repeated the allegations.
He shared a platform with Sajil Shahid, the man who trained the ringleader of the 7/7 attacks and accused the United States of bringing 9/11 on themselves.
But the smears didn't stick.
Zach Goldsmith ran a very negative campaign that was based on what people knew was a lie.
This election was not without controversy. And I'm so proud that London has today chosen hope over fear and unity over division.
After taking the mayor's office with a comfortable majority, Khan has brought a business-like efficiency to the role, scrapping expensive vanity projects like the Garden Bridge and the new Routemaster buses, which cost £350,000 each. The former lawyer who used to fight the police in court is now praised for his close relationship with them.
I was talking to a very senior police officer in the Metropolitan Police who said there was a sea change when he went into City Hall, and the police were saying how much they welcomed this because they knew where they stood and it was more straightforward to work with. So he works like a lawyer, he works like a government minister.
Khan's kept his faith at the fore. He's an outspoken voice for moderate Muslims across the world.
Donald J. Trump is calling for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States.
Now, by giving the impression that Islam and the West are incompatible, you're playing into the hands of the extremists.
The ongoing spat between Khan and US President Donald Trump escalated when Trump went after Khan, misquoting him on Twitter just hours after the terrorist attacks of June 3rd, 2017. Khan's now one of the most prominent Labour politicians in the UK. In fact, a recent poll of Londoners found Khan was more trusted to keep the country safe from terrorism than the Prime Minister or the Labour leader. His story of going from the son of an immigrant bus driver to the mayor of one of the greatest cities in the world plays well with Londoners. But can he appeal to the rest of the nation? Has Khan got his eye on the top job? And is the UK ready for a Muslim Prime Minister?
What does it take to change the world? A big army? A cure to a pandemic? A revolution? All of these take either a lot of people, thousands of hours, or massive amounts of space. But for Julian Assange, all he needs is one room, an internet connection, and the world will listen. Assange is located here, and more specifically, right here. And from that location, he's posted government secrets, classified documents, and leaked emails from some of the world's most powerful people. And in doing so, has been labeled a hero, a villain, a nihilist, and everything in between. This is how an Australian programmer sequestered in the Ecuadorian embassy in London became one of the most influential and notorious people in the world. Born in 1971 in Townsville, Australia, Assange has always been on the move. Living in over 30 homes by the time he was in his mid-teens, Assange, along with his mother and half-brother, finally settled down in Melbourne. His introduction to hacking started at 16 when he was given a Commodore 64, which he attached to a modem. He attended the University of Melbourne, where he studied programming, physics, and mathematics. He never graduated, but that doesn't mean he didn't get an education. By 1991, Assange hacked into the Pentagon, U.S. Navy, and other branches of the U.S. government. In 1996, he was caught by the Australian Federal Police and charged with over 30 counts of hacking and computer-related crimes. He didn't get any jail time, but he was fined $2,100.
I think the first taste of what would come later was the hacking that he did as a young programmer, and that really sort of foreshadowed a healthy skepticism of the use and abuse of technology by governments.
That's Vernon Silver.
I'm a reporter for Bloomberg's investigations team.
Assange's youth as a hacker laid the foundation for him to start WikiLeaks in 2006. But what is WikiLeaks? It's a website that posts unfiltered, usually classified documents. What separates it from every other media outlet is that they have no editorial hierarchy. With a publication like the New York Times, information comes in, they take that information, package it, then disseminate it for the public to see. WikiLeaks, however, cuts out the middleman.
WikiLeaks gathers information, most of it given to them anonymously. So what they're doing is really very simple. They get the information in one end from who gives it to them and out the other with sometimes minimal interference. Julian Assange is the leader of that, the mastermind, the creator, and really, because he thinks of it as a journalistic enterprise, the editor-in-chief.
But every story starts with a source, and Assange has some unconventional sources.
Julian Assange does not hack as far as we know. He is the recipient of people who are either insiders who give him secret documents or hacked emails from a foreign power.
That's Eli Lake.
I am a columnist for Bloomberg.
And there was no source bigger for Assange than Chelsea Manning, who used to be known as U.S. soldier Bradley Manning. In 2010, Manning provided Assange and WikiLeaks with hundreds of thousands of leaked government documents. WikiLeaks quietly began releasing the documents in February of 2010, then made big headlines in April by posting what is now known as the collateral murder video.
Come on, fire!
It was a vivid, graphic video. It changed the debate on the Iraq War, and importantly, it put WikiLeaks on the map when they put it online, and they couldn't be ignored at that point.
And those leaks were just the beginning. They went on to post more than 90,000 leaked documents known as the Afghan war logs, 390,000 documents known as the Iraq war logs, and 250,000 private messages between diplomats called cables in what is now known as Cablegate. These leaks were met with very real ethical questions.
The problem with publishing those cables was that a number of confidential sources for U.S. diplomats who faced real danger when their names were exposed.
Then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton drove the point home that
every country, including the United States, must be able to have candid conversations about the people and nations with whom they deal.
Shortly after Cablegate, the Swedish government issued an arrest warrant for Assange on allegations of rape and molestation. He claimed the allegations were fabricated to get him extradited to the United States, a claim the U.S. government denied. Either way, Assange's next move was
to seek refuge in the Ecuadorian embassy, which really was the beginning of the new chapter in his life and what we're dealing with now, which is him being stuck in London.
What was supposed to be an office in an embassy is now Assange's self-imposed prison to this very day. But that doesn't mean he's slowed down. Since being trapped in the embassy, WikiLeaks has released files about Guantanamo Bay prisoners, Syrian political figures, and the draft to the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And then came the 2016 U.S. election.
Thousands of leaked emails showed Democratic Party officials possibly plotting against Bernie Sanders in his race against Hillary Clinton.
Over the course of 68 days, WikiLeaks released 20,000 confidential Democratic National Committee emails. In terms of the presidential race, if you look right here, when Assange released the first batch of emails, Trump actually takes his first lead against Clinton.
I think we've had enough of the Clintons, in all fairness.
Once WikiLeaks started exposing secrets of the Democratic Party, Julian Assange became a hero to many on the right. Public opinion kind of flip-flopped.
WikiLeaks.
From the emails, we now know Hillary Clinton's campaign manager makes risotto, and also how the DNC squashed Bernie Sanders' campaign. One thing we don't know is who gave Assange the stolen emails in the first place.
Many leading Democrats say they suspect it was the Russians. They released an analysis from a private cybersecurity firm that had said it was the Russians.
But Assange claims
our source is not the Russian government, and it is not a state party.
So this is where we stand today. The public still doesn't know who provided the emails to WikiLeaks. Meanwhile, Assange is still running WikiLeaks and still releasing documents. In March 2017, he started publishing documents from the CIA's Center for Cyber Intelligence called Vault 7.
The CIA, the agency charged with finding and keeping our top secrets, can't keep its own secrets.
As long as Assange has a connection to the world, no government secret will be too far from exposure.
Julian Assange is still in the embassy. Maybe he'll leave, maybe he won't. Kind of regardless, his work has been done. He's changed the way people think about their governments, about their own secrets, about their own hackability, and really the world has changed because of him.
When it debuted, the 4G wireless we have today allowed people for the first time to hit the road and explore unknown places with only a smartphone for directions. When 5G arrives, it could enable driverless cars to take us there as well. 5G stands for 5th generation mobile networks or wireless systems. It's insanely fast and can accommodate a lot more connected devices. But the reason it's being called revolutionary is because 5G will allow connected devices to speak to each other as well as people.
Right now we're living in a world where really it's a one-way experience.
That's Bloomberg tech reporter Ian King.
The network talks to your phone, you look at your phone and access data, then you send something back to the network. What we're being told about 5G is that really for the first time we're going to see machines communicating with each other over mobile networks in a meaningful way.
5G could end up being 100 times faster than what we have now, with speeds that could reach 20 gigabits per second. In plain English, that means downloading a full-length HD movie in seconds. 5G will also increase total bandwidth, which we will need in order to accommodate the growing Internet of Things. We're talking about the class of devices like internet-connected refrigerators, thermostats, dog collars, but 5G will enable many, many more.
Things like your utility network, factories, where machines are just sat there not connected at all. Suddenly they're all going to be connected. Suddenly we're going to be able to have real-time monitoring. Other things like cars, like utility poles, like your light, the light poles.
But perhaps the biggest advance will be a huge reduction in communication lag time, known as latency. A network of driverless cars will need the speed of 5G to ping each other multiple times per second to avoid collisions. Near instantaneous data transfers could allow doctors to perform surgery remotely with a robotic scalpel. So how will all this work? First, you need to improve network density.
And that's just a fancy word for saying you put more towers out there. What we're being told is that's not actually the case with 5G.
The idea is 5G will not only use the existing mobile spectrum, but also tap into higher frequencies called millimeter waves. Millimeter waves can carry more data, but only travel short distances. This may mean you'll see a lot more of these base stations around town. And the new towers may have as many as 100 antenna ports, compared to about a dozen on 4G cell towers. So when will we get 5G? Getting 5G ready is expected to cost providers $275 billion over 7 years in the US alone. Look for the first 5G service to pop up in big cities sometime in 2019.
People think of Vladimir Putin, they think of capital P, power. And that's exactly the impression he creates. Whether it's physical power, firing different weapons, riding in various James Bond-esque modes of transportation, or tossing hapless opponents in judo. Or political power, ruling his own country with an iron fist, crushing his political opposition, or, most recently, being accused of meddling in foreign elections for his own benefit. This is how Vladimir Putin went from a poor, tough kid in Leningrad to a KGB spy to the very symbol of modern Russia. Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin was born in 1952 in Leningrad, which is now St. Petersburg. His father was a factory foreman and his mother a homemaker. It is widely said that Putin's public-facing tough guy persona can be traced back to him getting into fights when he was younger, which paved the way for him to take up judo. After getting a law degree from Leningrad State University, Putin joined the KGB Foreign Intelligence Service. He spent 16 years in the KGB. When Putin returned to Russia, he began his political career.
He went to work for, it's always
That's Leonid Bershidsky.
I'm a columnist at Bloomberg View.
Putin thrived in Sobchak's administration because
he was sort of considered pretty efficient city official at that time. He was very loyal to Sobchak.
So loyal and efficient that
he was noticed by Yeltsin's close circle.
And those people soon brought Putin over to Moscow to work in Yeltsin's administration, where he quickly climbed the political ladder.
Then, of course, he was promoted to Prime Minister of Russia.
That's Dmitry Trenin.
I am currently director of the Carnegie Moscow Center.
Around this time, Yeltsin and the people around him, the so-called family, decided that Putin would become Yeltsin's successor. And then this happened. The apartment bombings were carried out in 3 Russian cities, killing 293 people and injuring more than 1,000. Putin immediately accused Chechen separatists for the bombings and followed it up with action.
He was credited with having a very successful military campaign against the terrorists.
And it worked.
After that, he became an heir apparent in the eyes of the Russian people.
3 months later, Yeltsin resigned. And on his way out, a famous exchange.
He was getting into the car in the Kremlin, and the last words that he addressed to Putin before getting into his car was, "Take good care of Russia."
So Putin took over as president, and 3 months after that, won his first election. But just because Putin won the presidency, that didn't mean he had all the power. This is Michael McFall.
I was U.S. ambassador from 2012 to 2014. In the 1990s, there was a fire sale of all the things worth owning in Russia, and certain people,
the oligarchs,
did better than others in that fire sale, sometimes called privatization, and those people tended to be well connected with the Yeltsin regime, and they weren't Putin's friends. But they probably miscalculated, thinking that they could easily find a way to influence him. It became impossible almost from the start.
From that very moment, there was warfare between him and the oligarchs.
That's when Putin gave the oligarchs a choice. Putin's way?
Some of those people from the 90s managed to figure out a new way of dealing with Putin and have survived.
Or prison.
Others could not find common vision, and so they lost their assets.
Khodorkovsky once was Russia's richest person, worth $15 billion, but he ran afoul of President Vladimir Putin and spent a decade in prison.
With domestic power consolidated, Putin focused on restoring Russia's global influence.
Putin is the guy who believes in the expansionist Russian state. Georgia and Ukraine and all the other Soviet republics that split off when the Soviet Union fell apart, he still believes that they're traditional Russian satellites. A lot of his strategy is about keeping them in the orbit. That Yeltsin line, take good care of Russia, that's how he understands it.
And he used annexation and invasion, as well as oil, gas, and trade to keep former Soviet republics in Russia's orbit. In 2008, Putin's 2 terms were up, and he decided to step down as president. Dmitry Medvedev stepped in as president, and Putin went back to prime minister. But really,
Putin never left power. He pretty much continued running the country, and Medvedev was a bit of a figurehead.
There was actually a period of cooperation between Russia and the U.S. that benefited both countries during Medvedev's presidency.
Because Medvedev did not have the same negative attitude towards the West as Putin did.
But when Putin came back to run for a 3rd term, in the lead up to the 2012 election, it was widely believed that both the presidential and parliamentary elections were rigged, and Russians took to the streets. Putin blamed the protests squarely on America, and more specifically, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton.
He believed that she had sent, and this is his words, a signal to demonstrators.
Still, Putin won by a huge margin and set about crushing the protest movement immediately upon his return to the Kremlin. Over the next few years, Russia's economy tumbled. Putin annexed Crimea, leading to sanctions. The price of oil fell drastically. The ruble hit a new low, and America played down Russia's influence, with Obama calling Russia a regional power. Despite all of that, Putin's approval rating remained sky high, and then an opportunity for payback.
I think I'd get along very well with Vladimir Putin.
In 2016, there was one candidate who called Vladimir Putin very smart.
Trump exhibited tolerance towards Putin's actions annexing Crimea, and similar views on NATO and sanctions.
Secretary Clinton didn't support any of those views.
Even though Putin denies any wrongdoing,
U.S. elections. Yes.
The U.S. has accused Russia of being behind the leaking of 20,000 Democratic National Committee emails, which many say helped Trump beat Hillary Clinton in the presidential election. Which leaves us here with the possibility of a President Putin until